Okay, I'm gonna be honest with you. And then there was Sean as number one. Right, you lot, and here we are, my magnum opus. By far the most effort I've ever put into anything. That's not saying much, given my track record, but still, we're doing this. I'm in way too deep to back out now. Now, I'm sure you all literally rolled your eyes at this video. Why, Lewis? This random 90s sitcom? 4 hours of this, really? Because Boy Meets World is a miracle of a show.
On every single level. What makes this show really stand out for me is it was never afraid to tackle anything, and will discuss topics that other shows just wouldn't have dreamed talking of in the 90s. Topics like abusive parents, poverty, alcoholism, sex, consent, and the realities of the real world are all present. But please don't let that skew you into thinking that this show is just some somber soap opera, because trust me, it's also outright hilarious. And throughout this marathon, I won't shy away from pointing out some of my favourite jokes in it. But firstly, before we get to all of the ranking, I just want to give credit to the show's cast, who, for teenage and child actors, are usually not that great. You know, try and watch The Philosopher's Stone and try and get through the acting and that. But the teenagers in this show insane versatility. There's so much they have to do, you know, emotion, you know, comedy, and they have to do all sorts of ridiculous episodes, and they nail it every single time. And they really bring a great sense of realism, authenticity, and charisma to respective roles. And I feel like that has to be noted. This ranking is really long, so let's get to the point. But firstly, some rules. My ranking metric isn't particularly consistent. I base it on a mix of personal enjoyment, critical level, but also how relevant it is today. I'm also going to be rating each episode out of 10 to kind of put the quality into perspective. Oh, this bit isn't entirely relevant, but while watching the show, I sort of separated the episodes into 4 categories that kind of define their purpose. And I kind of found this interesting. Now, the first type of episode we have is the Adventure of the Week episode. These are your standards episodes. A conflict is brought up and it's solved within the episode. A lesson is learned at the end, but it's never really mentioned again. A great example of this would be the season 3 episode, Hometown Hero. Then secondly, we have character arc episodes. These are the episodes that are significant and kind of define the characters and help us uncover different sides to them, as well as also hitting on the themes of the season. A great example of this would obviously be The Fugitive, or aka the Cherry Bomb episode, which I'm sure you all know, that really defines the character of Sean Hunter to everyone. Then you have the Studio Note episode. These are episodes where it's clear that TGIF told the studio something that had to be included, and this usually has mixed results. Now sometimes they make something great out of this, but for everyone then there was Sean, you get a singled out. Then finally we have the special episodes. These are the powerful episodes that focus on serious issues. A great example of this would be Dangerous Secrets. Now all 4 episode types can be effective. Spoiler actually, the top 5 includes one of each of these archetypes, which I didn't do intentionally, but they just fell into place. So look out for these. Now finally, I do want to address the elephant in the room that has to be tailored to. And I will try to remember throughout this that this is a show as a product of its time, and in places I won't let the bits that don't age well completely hinder my assessment. That doesn't mean I won't bring it up, but I won't let it drag it down, and I'll try and remember that for the 90s and a lot of places this show was actually quite progressive. I mean, as progressive as you can get in the 90s, so anyway, enough stalling. Are you prepared for the worst episode of Boy Meets World? And the worst episode is the 4th to last episode of the whole show. Now that's a twist. Now Boy Meets World got lazy every once in a while with being forced to put out 22 episodes of the series. Not every episode could be a classic that was super important. And that couldn't be more the case than with season 7 episode 20 as time goes by. Every once in a while the show would make these out of left field, just non-canon dream sequence episodes. I think the issue's obvious here. It's a dream sequence. It adds nothing. You could never watch these and would miss absolutely nothing. And the worst offender of this for me is season 7 episode 20 as time goes by. Okay, they did it once in season 3, I let them off, and season 5 had 24 episodes, so I can excuse it a bit more. But as the fourth to last episode of the whole show, there's so much more you could have done, and you chose this. This episode is also by far the most wacky of this trilogy, and although not technically the worst, it has to be here. I've also thrown in season 5 episode 6, No Guts, No Corey, and season 5 episode 19, I Was a Teenage Spy. If you're watching this show for the first time, do me a favour and skip these. Little spoiler, along with Forever episode, I actually skip these as well on rewatch because they're so pointless. So now we've got them out of the way. Right, so the first actual episode, and coming in the 155th, is season 2, episode 6, Who's Afraid of the Corey Wolf? In this eye roller studio note episode, in a metaphor to symbolise puberty, Corey thinks he's turning into a wolf. What could have been a good dive into puberty and the changes we had to face is just way too silly and juvenile. A 12-year-old, Corey acts like a 5-year-old. And the whole thing is just wasted potential for me. And no, the Corey and Topanga kiss at the end does not save this episode. The episode has Corey go see this voodoo witch, and I'm just shaking my head the whole time. And yet I skipped this episode. 2 out of 10. Now coming in the 154th, you knew it would be here. It's season 7, episode 2, For Love and Apartments. Oh, where do I start? Both plotlines I hate so much. After the third and most pointless Corey and Topanga broke up, Corey and Sean go to Pittsburgh to try and force Topanga's parents together. Now, this is going to bring me to the catchphrase of Corey's audacity. This is a catchphrase I'm going to use a lot throughout this series. Corey always means well, but he crosses the line too much, and I hate his behaviour here. The whole thing is too jarring. Topanga has a completely different set of parents every time we see them, and they just thought we'd be oblivious to that fact. Although Topanga's mum smashes the role, the whole thing just pushes the suspension of disbelief. And instead of delving in onto the cheating plotline, they patch up a rivalry between Sean and Topanga's dad that was never mentioned before for some reason. I don't get that. The only part that I like is that Corey keeps the secret that the dad cheated to protect him. That's the only redeeming factor. The B's plot is somehow even worse than what I despise. After Jack and Eric are kicked out of their apartment that they signed for, they have to wrestle Angela, Rachel and Topanga for their apartment that Jack owns. And honestly, the whole thing is just an excuse to bring in this WWE ref. And unlike the episode with Vader or the baseball player in season 1, this doesn't play into the message and it's just a lame, not funny cameo. One scene I just mentioned is the first of Eric and Jack are just bi moments. If you watch this show, you know that there was some sexual tension between Jack and Eric, that if it came out now, it would be addressed. They have a scene where they discuss who the hottest Backstreet Boy is. I thought that was worth a mention. Overall, this episode just misses the mark completely on every level, and I definitely can't argue against it being the lowest episode of the series. 2 out of 10. Now in 143rd, be ready, because this is my most hated episode of the show. Season 5, episode 21st, Honesty Night. My first thought is why. After finally being back together, Corey and Topanga realise they never told Sean. So for some reason pretend to be broken up so Sean can put them back together, only for them to get into an actual fight. In my notes I was just filled with so much frustration. In what world did Topanga and Corey ever think this would end well? I love how every character, even Sean himself, calls out what a stupid idea this was. But they still all play along. And it's very uncharacteristically on Feeney's part as well. So, also the argument they had was literally forced. Corey was pressured to say something he didn't like about Topanga, and she does overreact. And apparently they have to watch Alan and Amy argue to learn couples indeed argue. Oh writers, what were you thinking with this one? It's only above Corey, Wolf and the Love and Apartments because they were missed potential. This was just a terrible concept. And as the last episode of the Lawrence saga, it was such a waste. 2 out of 10. That bombshell, somehow 152nd, is even more bullshit, as we've got Season 6, Episode 10, In Case I Didn't See You. In this apparent Truman Show parody, we see Eric completely exploit Rachel's trauma. And even for Eric, this is too ridiculous to get behind. The message of Face and Fizz just isn't earned, and unlike And Then There Was Sean, you didn't need to watch Scream to get it. Unless you're a Truman Show fan, you're getting nothing from this. And in a B plot is even worse, as we see Sean and Corey take advantage of Mr. Feeney as he gives them one extension, and they just think, because of their predetermined relationship with Feeney, he'll just do this again. The boys just fail to get it. I would have bought this naivety in Season 2, however in Season 6, it just feels like a lazy storyline. Overall, I got nothing from this episode. Honestly, just a D tier 2.5 out of 10 episode. Now in 151st, we've got the less offensive but still terrible Season 7 Episode 1's Show Me the Love. After Topanga's parents reveal to get a divorce, Topanga feels like she doesn't believe in love and can't marry Corey. In a B plot, after a misunderstanding, Jack and Eric get kicked out of the apartment. Now I've already expressed what my problem with this plot. The way the girls manipulate Jack is just despicable, and Jack should have full ownership of this property. I hate so much of this episode. The show completely forgets why Andrew and Sean broke up as well, and just reduces it to her being influenced by Topanga. And I hate that whole thing. No, Angela gave Sean the chance, and she was tired of waiting around for him. Her maturity and nuanced stance is taken from her. Also, I'm sorry, Topanga is in the wrong in this episode. I get it's a difficult time for her, but this whole thing is lazy. You cannot compare one relationship to another, and doing that is damaging. We've already seen this concept done way better in Dangerous Secret, which we will get to later on. Corey says a quote I love in this episode. I don't care about other people. If every single marriage fell but ours, I'd bet $1 million it's ours. And in a rare instant, I'm actually Team Corey. I feel bad for the boys. What they meant to do. Luckily, both couples are back together quickly. This episode also contains a storyline about Morgan going on her first date and Alan's hesitance. The contrast between this and Corey's first date is so telling, and I'm glad Amy does call Alan out on it. However, this is disregarded when Morgan picks an inappropriate time, rendering Alan's lesson pointless, which just completely messes up the storyline. And finally, this is an episode of Short Hair Eric where they ruin his character. However, to be honest, it wasn't as bad as I remembered on rewatch. So overall, about 4 storylines and not one of them works. 2.5 out of 10. Alright, 150th now. We're all the way back in Season 1 with a Story of the Week episode. Episode 19, Kids' Gloves. On Corey's birthday, Alan gives Corey a pair of gloves. Him not knowing the meaning, carelessly loses them on a scuba trip, only to find out the meaning. This episode is just really lazy from the start. It's Corey's birthday, and no one brings this fact up. Also, what father just puts a gift on their son's head and doesn't explain it, and then is disappointed when their kid doesn't get gassed about it? I'm sorry, the scuba plotline is also lazy. Why would you put midterms near the end of the school year? I know we're supposed to I might be over-analysing stuff like this because it is a 1990s sitcom, but the writing in some episodes is so strong that when you get a plot like this, it's just lazy. And while Alan's story of how he won it from getting second in his boxing division is sweetening, this man gives us so many backstories in this show. It's hard to get behind this particular one. And while the message is nice, and yes, that graduate shot was a cool homage, it does not save just an all-around lazy episode. 3 out of 10. Ugh. Now coming in at 149th. I swear the episodes get good. We've got another irritating Studio Note episode. Season 5, Episode 5, The Witches of Pembroke. Firstly, I've got to talk about Sean, who is the saving grace of this episode. He's just full-on comic relief embracing the witches. He's just hilarious. I mentioned him this first because it's probably the only aspect I like, and the reason it's above Kid's Glove. This episode frustrates me. What could have been a good dive into Eric and Jack's relationship and Jack's isolation coming into this new town. Instead, in similar vein to Who's Afraid of the Corey Rule, it's just way too over the top. Jack starts dating a girl Eric disapproves on, who later turns up to be a witch. However, what frustrates me about this is if you're gonna have a Sabrina collaboration, fine, fully embrace it. Do not attempt a serious message in an episode of Serb this. So what we get is a witch plotline that goes nowhere, and a message that could have been more. So the whole thing, you're just not satisfied on either front. You can't get the best of both worlds. At least try and nail one down. I must mention is that in some point in this episode, Eric asks Feeney if he can camp at his place. Like, your parents are literally one doors down. I don't know if that's supposed to show Eric's stupidity or the strength of Eric and Feeney's dynamic. I'd hope for the latter. 3 out of 10 overall. Coming in 148th and closing out the bottom 10, thank God, is the psychotic episode. Another dream sequence! Yay! However, I take this one over something like No Guts or No Corey, as it actually is relevant. As someone who's fascinated by the psychology of dream, this episode should appeal to me. However, it's just too bizarre. In this episode, we see Corey's fear of marriage, and most notably his fear of losing Sean. But I feel like they only scratch the surface. I want to go deeper. But they'd rather waste time on Eric getting a new roommate that goes nowhere and left me speechless in just the worst way possible. A Lauren cameo is good fan service, and I'm surprised the show did an episode like this, but overall it was an experiment that didn't stick the landing. 3 out of 10. Now, 147th place shows the worst kind of Studio Note episode, as we've got Season 4, Episode 7, Singled Out. So where they feel like they didn't even try. After feeling like his life's going nowhere, Eric lies about being in college to get on the NTV show Singled Out. Meanwhile, in a B plotline, Corey thinks he's going to disappear during his operation. I can't tell which storyline is where the B plot contains a dream sequence, so that's already going to mark down the episode. And it's just a pretty lame, not very funny gimmick. But what frustrates, Eric-centric episodes are some of my favourite in this show, and you'll see some of them really high up later on. But this was just lazy. So little care was put into this, and all we got is a face value don't lie lesson you'd expect on something like Modern Family, not Boy Meets World. And the date that Eric wins being at Chubby's just symbolises the laziness, only for him to learn a lesson he's already learned to better effect in Hair to Dig On Tomorrow. And again, I'm sure people who grew up with Singled Out may get more of a kick out of this episode. Again, to reference And Then There Was Sean, you didn't need to know Scream to enjoy it. And I mean, the one saving grace in this episode is that it's the episode that gave us the Feeney call. And I would feel wrong to put an episode in the bottom 10 that brought us such a stamp on the show. But overall, I just expect better. 3 out of 10. Ugh. 146 now, we have the Season 1 finale that couldn't feel less like a finale. Season 1, Episode 22, I Dream of Feeney. This episode should not have been a final, and it feels more like a leftover episode. Well, I like the thematic mirroring of starting and finishing the season with a Feeney core extent episode. We could have done better in this episode. After wishing Feeney's ill, and then he's actually ill, Corey thinks he's killed Feeney. And we're met with a dream sequence episode. While I find the transition into the dream amusing, it's an extreme waste of time. What really saves this episode for me is the garden scene with the flower metaphor that actually comes into play in the finale. But apart from that, after the great Boy Meets Girl, this fails to be a conclusion, and Minka's not getting a send-off is horrible. This would be a lot lower if it wasn't for that final scene. Overall, it's a 3 out of 10. Coming in 145th, and this is the episode that really emulates one of the show's biggest flaws, and that is its inability to write female characters. Now, the podcast Bro Meets World that I have to shout out because they tackle this show so much more interesting than me. I mean, they're two black guys who sort of, fulfill the experience of growing up with the show, and their nuanced take compared to me, a teenager from an irrelevant city. So go check them out. But they do a better job explaining this. But Basically, if you're a girl in Boy Meets World, you fall into one of three characters. You're either the perfect girl. Now, this is usually Topanga, but can be Amy. Or others. Where you're basically perfect. And are subject to male ego. Or you're the nice girl, just innocent, and the audience usually feels bad for them. And then you've got the bitch of the weak character, who is an asshole and just a man's worst nightmare. Or your Morgan. Who am I kidding? Like she had a character. And these issues couldn't be more present in Season 2, Episode 11, The Beard. Being just unable to pick between two girls. Sean makes Corey date one to keep her off the market. I feel sick even saying it. Do I really need to explain the issue here? I feel so bad for the women in the episode, especially Linda, who I actually thought had great chemistry with Corey. And this episode does a better episode than most at showing Corey's quality kind of on a date and what he offers. But when I'm glad the girls, once they find out the scheme, are just done with the duo, I really don't think a lesson is learned. The B plot also follows the trend of poor treatment of women, as Adam buys Amy a car without permission. Jeez, wonder what the problem is there. Overall, clearly an episode of its time, and what's at face value a Met episode is made worse by its presentation and treatment of women, with the lack of repercussions the boys face. 3 out of 10. Now in 144, something completely different. We have Season 6, Episode 19, Be True. An episode that shows college students involved in a 70-plus-year-old love life. It just sounds wrong if you didn't know what this show is, doesn't it? After an old friend of the Dean comes back into town, the gang have to convince Feeney to make a move on the Dean. Well, I like the ending here, and I dig how they play up the meta of Feeney always overthrowing Corey and Sean's schemes. This plot is ridiculous and so cartoonish. Corey and Sean trash an archaeologist's room, destroying a 1 in a million bee. Instead of the focus being that, the focus is on Feeney taking a bee sting for Dean Boulder. You're rewarding human decency. Bloody hell. But I can't be too harsh on this episode, as the humour is great, and you could tell by now the show's having fun with the, stereotypes. However, it's just bonkers. I guess I should mention the B storyline, including Jack feeling self-conscious on his height with Rachel. A feeling unfortunately accurate by many men today. Not a big fan of it personally, really. So overall, this episode should be lower, but I just love a Feeney-centric episode. 3 out of 10. Now in 143rd, we're back with more lazy writing with Season 1. With Season 1, Episode 18, It's a Wonderful Life. In an episode with so much wrong with it. When Alan and Amy go out, Feeney is forced to babe Corey, who's attempting to watch an R-rated movie, and Eric, who lied to his parents but passing his driving test. This episode is so lazy. Corey and Sean are watching an R-rated movie and then switch the channel as Feeney walks by because he can't hear them. Less than a metre away. For a man of Feeney's intelligence, this is ridiculous and presents a very character that Winnie and Daniels refused to play from the beginning. Corey literally has a TV in his bedroom. If they were watching it upstairs, it may have been slightly more believable. It's just lazy. And as for Eric, he lies to his parents under influence of Jason, who is a standout in this episode. It's just really a bad influence. This is also a bad episode lore-wise, as we know how important getting a license is to Alan in the episode Wills. But Lionel, of course, he makes a mistake. But what I hate the most is these one-dimensional gold-digging bouncer girls who I can't stand and are just flat-out rude to Eric and Jason. And they were the prime motivation behind this lie. But to be fair, of course it is, because Eric doesn't have a character besides girls in these first 2 seasons. And yet the scolding Eric is given is good, but this is such a nothing episode. The reason I'd say this above Kids Glove is because there was something there in Kids Glove, so it infuriates me more. This is such a nothing episode, and Posmean's World did an incredible job picking the holes in this train wreck. 3 out of 10, move on. Coming in at 142nd, for me it's just an all-around awkward episode. Season 2, Episode 11, Kairana. Against their will, Harley forces Corey and Sean to help his friend Frankie with a girl, only for this girl to be Harley Kiner's girlfriend. I just personally find this whole thing really jarring. There's a scene where Harley talks to Amy for love advice, and the whole thing just feels like off. Well, some of the gags are good, and it's nice to see a solid side of Frankie. Clearly the most interesting complex of him, Joey and Harley, but this episode just doesn't do it for me. And I do struggle with Harley sometimes. Like, get a life! You could tell this character just didn't exist in the 90s. Overall, it's just a bit of air. 3.5 out of 10. In 141st, a pretty standard Season 7 episode. In Season 7, Episode 5, you light up my union. In this mostly filler episode, Eric, being the bumbling idiot he is, gives all his money to deposit a monkey, only for Jack to learn the importance of having a good heart. Well, I like the message here. I just hate Eric in Season 7. And although Will Friedle is so good and always nails the ridiculous stuff they give him, it just frustrates me to see him so backwards. Jack does say a great line which I can't help but laugh at. This world is going to crush you. I feel sorry for you, man, but I'm not going to let you drag me down with you. However, the one thing that's good about Season 7 Eric is how they paint him as this pure and innocent and good-hearted, and sort of has this way with people. However, what really ruins this episode for me is the B plot, where Corey and Sean go through many of Rachel's possessions, including her diary and underwear drawer. Look, I get it's a sitcom, but what are we doing here, guy? And for Corey, and for Topanga and Angela to just give them a light 10 off is so out of character. And even when Eric and Jack are not in the picture, they still just show Rachel as nothing but a sex symbol. 3.5 out of 10. 140th now in a truly bizarre episode, Season 5, Episode 10, The Last Tango in Philly. After the show just claims that Topanga and Angela are best friends. No, genuinely, it literally comes out of nowhere. They're just best friends because, Sean and Corey are friends and are both dating them, so we need to have it's just a bit lazy. The boys are all jealous of the duo for having a fun night out with their workmate that they've already turned down. The boys are just out of line here. This episode contains a scene where all the male characters just sit down and just agree they don't get women, which is symbolic, I reckon, the writer's room, as I reckon the entire writer's room just sit there and have had a similar conversation. The boys fail to congratulate the girls on the great job doing their job, and instead just complain about a nonsensical issue. And yeah, the final bit is nice, seeing everyone dance, but it doesn't save this train wreck of an episode. This is all an episode that is just made off of male horniness and clinginess. Terrible episode, but a few good jokes does raise it to a 3.5 out of 10. Oh, coming in 139 with an episode I'm really struggling with. And that's just so forgettable. Once in love with Amy. Corey thinks Amy is cheating after lying about a bowling party, which she's actually sneaking out with Alan. Also in this episode, Feeney gives a ridiculous math problem if we see the insanity of Stuart Minkus. So that's something. But yeah, this episode has all the impact of Liz Truss tenure as Prime Minister. The boys all teaming together to hunt Amy down is sweet, I guess. Good to see Amy do something other than typical mum, and I'm just so bored. What was the point of this episode? I'm really trying, guys. 4 out of 10, move on. Now coming in at 138th is Season 1 again with Episode 5, Killer Bee. Imagine having 2 episodes with the title B and both were terrible. This show must hate bees. I found that quite amusing. After finding out the winner of a national geography tournament gets to be Batboy, Corey has an instant interest in geography and plans to go to this by manipulating Minkus into trying to, let's just call Minkus' best impression of Sandy from Greece. Trust me, I'll get to that convoluted mess one day. My glaring issue here is, why would this be the prize? And even the other contestants at the event call out how pointless this prize is. It's just lazy writing. Corey's studying is amusing, however the whole episode just feels like it could be any sitcom. And while the attempts are messy, it just doesn't have that boy meets world magic yet. But I can't be too harsh on this one, as it is quite early on in the show's running. They're still finding their bearing. 4 out of 10 for me. Coming in 137, it's a frustrating one. Season 6, episode 15, Road Trip. When Sean Hunter runs away for like the 1,000th time after the death of his father, he goes to this old town with the hope to stay there, only for his mind to be changed. Following the 2-part banger of Chet's death and the aftermath, Sean goes back to a town that knew Chet. Sean going back to a town that knew Chet should have been so much better. Instead, we have this horrendous subplot with this girl band who are being held back by their father, and the episode decided to dedicate a 2-minute poor lip sync number to these girls, and they use it as a catalyst to get Sean to go back, and it just doesn't work. The episode also shows the aftermath of Jack and Rachel getting together, and I'll explain in greater detail why I hate the origins of this relationship later on in the video, but I just can't enjoy the storyline because of this. Overall, the episode could have been so much better, and this, unfortunately, the great quote of "Your father died, Sean, but he ain't gone," and the appearance of Ghost Jet doesn't save it. It's a 4 out of 10 for me. Now, in 136, continuing the theme of could have been a season 1, episode 9, class pre-union, an episode that frustrates. After the students are set up to come up with what they could be in 20 years, only for Finney to derail Corey's dreams of being a baseball player because he doesn't have what it takes. It's his lack of thought which is Finney's issue. I find Finney quite unreasonable in this one, which is a rarity. He gives them only 1 day to do this assignment and is not satisfied with 11-year-olds' unrealistic dreams. Like, really, dude? What could have been an interesting concept? It's just a lazy studio note for this guest star baseball player to come and talk to Corey, which just doesn't feel earned and misunderstands Feeney's original point. Apparently, Adam wrote to this guy using telegrams, which I rated as a joke, but it does show the desperation. Also, in a B story, we get this typical bitch of the week when Morgan trades her necklace to this snobby family, only for Amy to get one over on her. I dig how Amy outsmarts her, and women like her do exist. But I didn't get much out of this frustrating episode, unfortunately. Now in 135th, we have a good example of the tagline that's Corey's audacity. Because most Boy Meets World episodes all sort of know. Because most Boy Meets World fans kind of know in the latter seasons Corey's just kind of the worst. But we tend to not mention it. With the get out of jail card that, oh, he means well. Well, I really think the issue with Corey is that as he gets older, his immaturity and constant mistakes aren't as viable as they were in the beginning. And the show will see Corey learn lessons he should know by now. And in 135th is season 6, episode 6, Hugs and Kisses. A weird episode on all accounts. After being forced to kiss Topanga for a video, Sean is made to go on a date with Topanga, only for them to troll Corey. This episode contains a whole scene where Topanga and Sean make fake sex noises. Why? There's a scene where Corey admits to having a wet dream about Angela. So many WTF moments. This is unfortunately an episode that keeps focusing on this whole kissing doesn't mean anything, and Corey being so perplexed is just furthermore proving that Lauren did mean something, and Corey's obsessiveness and obnoxious behaviour can be entertaining but is way out of line. Also, I have to point out this is the second time in the show Sean has to kiss Topanga. I just thought that was worth noting because it is a bit weird, isn't it? The only saving grace of this episode is 2 things. First, the humour is really good. Angela says a line in particular I really dig. White history. You guys contributed a lot to our history, you know. And of course, underpants. Trust me, I can never hear the phrase the same way. Ben's delivery is just too good. Overall, the episode is a bonkers mess, but I'd rather watch it over any other episode we've seen so far, so 4.5 out of 10. Now on to 134. For now, a good news. Sort of. We're past the episode now that I would consider outright bad. Now only 5 out of 10 and above. But that also means I'm going to be a bit more male a lot of these and not being as passionate. Next up is an interesting one. Season 2, episode 10, Sister Fiesa. Corey starts dating a girl who's straight up obsessed with him. However, when trying to break up with her, he finds out the unfortunate truth that she's Harley Keiner's sister. Well, I dig what they're going for here and appreciate some depth onto Harley. And I do start to see the guy in a different light, and you start to understand how he became this ridiculous character. But, however, I really don't like how they write TK. She does not feel human and feels more like a male fantasy than a human. Also, Harley needs to get a life. However, this is far from terrible. The humour with Frankie and Joey's is always great, and the overall humour is great. And we get one of my favourite quotes from Sean as well, where he says, "Nothing says I love you like a big piece of meat." Overall concept is not the best, but the execution gets it a 5 out of 10. Now in 133rd, we have Pairing Off, an episode I can only describe as standard Boy Meets World. After feeling that everyone's pairing off, Corey feels left out for the crowd. The episode contains a scene with Corey and Topanga where Topanga won't date him yet because she doesn't want to ruin a lifetime friendship. The relationship will end after 2 weeks, and then they will hate each other. I dig that the show have taken their time with getting them together. My only issue with this one is it's not the episode itself, but how it starts this girl-centricness of season 2. And Eric's storyline is more interesting, however, as after Corey walks into Eric and a girl in bed, the girl realises the reality of what she's doing and leaves, only for Amy to later find her earring. I'm glad the show points out how clueless Eric is with women, as he gives terrible advice to Corey, which I'll dismiss because he's called out on but a valuable lesson is learned. How the episode just didn't resonate for me. Just a bit meh. 5 out of 10. Now in 131st, more season 1 mediocrity with season 1 episode 6, Boys to Mensa. After cheating on an IQ test, Corey is visited by a specialist who wants to see him as a genius school. Corey learns a valuable lesson, which I do dig. I love how literally every character knows Corey blatantly cheated, and it's not about the lie reveal, but more him just having to open up. However, the plot convenience is just unbelievable. But they just so happen to so easily stumble upon IQ test answers as the first thing on the top of the bin. Extreme laziness. The B storyline isn't much of note either when Eric uses Morgan to chat up girls. I don't know how I feel about this. So overall, I can't be too hard on this one, as they're finding the show at this point, but it's a bit of a 5 out of 10. 130th now, we have an iconic but a messy episode with season 2, episode 15. Breaking up is really hard to do. Corey starts dating Wendy, however things get out of hand where Wendy starts painting out a whole future with Corey at just 12. We just have to point out that the irony that the writers literally make Corey and Topanga this very thing. And even constant jokes make of them being an old couple. And that's an amusing coincidence for me. It's like you made all these jokes about Wendy going on like, oh, the rest of our lives, we're going to do this, we're going to have children. When literally a season later, they paint Topanga and Corey these star-crossed lovers. So, Corey, you're not much better than Wendy. However, what I don't like in this episode is how they treat Wendy. She's clearly a sweet girl, not quite understanding, but instead of taking her aside and being nice, and Amy just make all these off behind her back remarks, calling her a loon, which is just really unfortunate. They also tried to paint Wendy as this new character when she previously appeared, and she's out of line with her previous appearance. So overall, an entertaining but problematic episode, a 5 out of 10 for me. Now in 129th, this is a short segment because it's such a simple one. The second episode of the whole show, season 1, episode 2, On the Fence. You've got to love it when the central conflict is Corey wants a water gun and loves the reality of work. This is a sweet, charming episode, and I have to laugh. How do we go from this to the realities of young marriage? But for what this is, I dig it. Alan and Corey's dynamic is lovely and the water fight is incredible. But the episode just doesn't stack up to compare the episode's more complex themes that are later portrayed. Morgan also calls the police at the end in just the most comical way possible. Well, that was good exciting. Overall, just a 5 out of 10 for me. 128th, when we have a classic studio note example. Season 2, episode 15, Danger Boy. After Eric sets up a double date with him and Sean, As Sean appears more appealing to girl, Corey goes to challenge perception of how people see him. While at the same time, Feeney is annoyed at Turner for assuming he'd run a stereotypical club like chess over something adventurous. To challenge these stereotypes, the duo decide to ride a deadly roller coaster. While I dig the message of challenging what people think of you and not setting for people's expectations, the whole episode just feels like they wrote Corey and Feeney ride a roller coaster and called it a day. Overall, just a bit of a nothing episode. But at least there was some substance to it, I guess. In 127th, another nothing episode was Season 2, Episode 20, Pop Quiz, where pretty much Corey and Sean feel like they pulled a great plot line when they find the lesson plan that Turner blatantly left out for them. It's just succeeding in the felt school system, mate. It's called studying. And I do find that plot amusing, but it's not much of note. The B plot is made more interesting as Hardy admits to not returning, and Frank and Joey do their best impression of the minions to find a new leader to be lackeys to. Well, they do, and they find Griff, played by Adam Scott, who is the sole reason we remember this character, let's be honest. Is they had Adam Scott on the show, do you remember? Because I don't. However, I do actually like Griff, as he represents a realistic bully that would probably exist in this time period, in a contrast to Harley, who's just too over the top and just wouldn't exist in the 90s. And he offers a new challenge to Feeney, and I wish he would have stayed kind of a bit more. However, this episode is just okay for me overall. 5 out of 10. Now in 126, it's something completely different. Enter Chick Like Me, done wrong with Season 7, Episode 11, What a Drag. Now I think I should address how this show talks of the LGBTQIAP plus community. You'll be happy to know it's quite respectful. I mean, for the 90s, it is. Well, we never see an openly gay or trans character. And while they imply jokes, they tend to hold to the notion of not that there's anything wrong with it. And the characters never say anything homophobic or transphobic. Fortunately, with the exception of this line, Double D's just like your grades. However, I think that's more of a dig on Eric's stupidity. Anyway, on to the episode. After getting in trouble with a gang, Eric and Jack dress up as girls to hide from them, and the latter one gets one over on them. I'll give the gang one thing: they definitely serve as more of a threat and a bit more believable compared to other gangs we get in the show. However, this whole concept just doesn't work for them. When Sean dressed up as a woman, it was an earnest attempt to understand women. Well, this is played more an attempt to take advantage of these shadow men. I'm just a bit iffy on it. And one thing I have to say is, as hot as Jack turns out to be in Season 7, Eric kind of transfers way better into a girl. I also take issue with the B story where Corey redecorates the apartment without Topanga's permission, and Topanga hates it, but she doesn't have the heart to break Corey's spirit. My first thought there is communication. Topanga not telling Corey her issues is extremely out of character and feels like lazy writing for me. Fortunately, Corey realises Topanga's displeasure and does fix it, but there could have been a good discussion of compromises, but no. Overall, this episode just really misses the mark for me. 5 out of 10. On 25th, we have another example of a Studio Note episode done wrong, with Season 2, Episode 21, The Thriller in Filler. In the first of many, Corey wanting to find himself,
joins the wrestling team and has a fight against Joey the Rat set up by Griff, only for Frankie to bring his father Vader in. Now this brings me to a big issue I find with this show, and that is Vader. So we get a few episodes dedicated to Frankie, really fleshing him out. And we put a lot of focus onto the dynamic with his dad and their contrasting personalities. My big issue is I struggle to take the character of Vader seriously. I get he's a character, but he's too cartoonishly over the top and I can't emotionally resonate. And this issue with Vader is really on show here, as he goes to beat up a 13-year-old Corey Matthews. And I'm like, bro, just get a life. But as bonkers as this episode is, I do enjoy it. We get 2 great cameos. You've got to love how the anticlimactic fight really is. It's just reminds me when you pay for the Tyson Fury bloody pay-per-view and then he knocks them out in the first round. It's this is very unoriginal, suspension of disbelief, and it's the 5th time in Season 2 we do as the Corey wanting to find a plot line. However, the humour does save it. His two lines I particularly like. Firstly, I like "You Were Scarier When You Had Acne" by George Feeney, and "But All the Good Lives Are Taken" by Joe the Rat. Overall, an episode I'd happily rewatch, but it's lacking actual quality. 124th now, and back to season 1 with season 1, episode 7, Grandma with a Rolling Stone. An episode that puts the whole pitch of the entire show of middle child syndrome into practice, as Alan's grandma comes into town, making promises to all three kids, but leaving out Corey in the end. I like how certain things are implied here with the grandma, and we get a good picture of who this woman really is. But I wish we focused more on it, and Alan himself actually got a moment where he could, call this out. However, the whole episode is a bit redundant, considering we never see this woman again, but then again, that could be intentional on their part, knowing the way they depict her. This episode also features the famous bag toss, which really defined Wilfredo as that absolute comedic genius. And in the B-plot, Eric goes on a date with Feeney's niece, who is never mentioned again, with the help from Morgan, who also might as well not be mentioned again. I'm joking, it's a joke. What I like this episode is clearly not in line with where the show went, considering none of this is really brought up again, so it's a bit pointless, and that kind of brings it down. But 5 out of 10 overall. 123rd now, and we're back to season 1 again. Wow, they took their time. Anyway, we have season 1, episode 20, The Plays the Thing. A really simple yet effective episode. After pulling out of the Hamlet performance, Minkus takes on the role of Hamlet to little success, only for Corey to learn the importance of being needed. This episode includes an incredible Shakespeare dialogue from William Daniel, which makes it worth watching. I also like how we drop little clues on the importance of the reason Sean's doing this is because of his dad seeing it, and I feel like that's a good kind of foreshadowing moment. I also like that the show depicts Minkus as not being able to ace something, and showing that he's not completely this one-dimensional smart guy who can do no wrong. Overall, the only reason this one's low, really, is because it isn't too impactful for me. There's nothing particularly wrong with it, but it's kind of forgettable. 5 out of 10.
Now, coming in at 122nd, we have another Mare Studio No episode with season 4, episode 9, 16 Candles and 4,000 Army Men. After promising to help Frankie with a relationship with his dad at his biggest fight, yet he realises that this event falls on the same date as Topanga's Sweet 16, that despite formally downplaying, means the absolute world to her. Corey must do the classic 2 places at once. This is an episode that is an absolute blast, but it really falls apart the more you analyse it. Communication is my first fault. Corey should have been blunt with Topanga. She would have understood, and they could have made timings work. A walkie-talkie, if we were here today, a phone, would have made this whole ordeal completely redundant. Also, as I previously stated, I struggle with the Stachino family. However, it's handled decently, and at least Vader comes to the obvious conclusion that he can love his son despite him not being a wrestling fan. I mean, did a middle-aged man really need to learn that? And that his support should be enough for him. And overall, they were clearly forced to put wrestling in the show, and I'm glad they tried to tell a story and something singled out. So I do rate this episode. So it's a really fun episode with the whole Flintstone parody and everything, but unfortunately it does have some blatant holes. 5 out of 10. Now in 121st, can we bring up the tagline of Corey's Audacity? With the first of many appearances with Season 5, Episode 9, How to Succeed in Business. This episode is the first chronologically where I can't stand Corey, and really kickstarts his downwards trajectory. After Corey and Sean both get a job, Sean starts to flourish while Corey ends up as a janitor. Not only is Corey so self-centered, but he's also out of character. Throughout the show, he's been Sean's biggest champion, even when Sean has really looked down on himself. Corey should realise what a great moment this is for his friend, who's always struggled financially. Having a legit job, he should be so happy, but instead he's completely horrible to Sean, who doesn't boast or rub it in Corey's face. He's just extremely apologetic and saint-esque. Sean is too good for Corey in this episode. And he feels bad for Corey, only for Corey to make the whole vibe just so awkward. And even says, for the first time, I'm just jealous of you. Corey's just so naive and out of touch here. And also for Corey to look down on janitors after the episode Janitor Dad is so lazy writing. But what actually saves this episode from the bottom 10 really is the B story where Amy goes to Eric's creative writing classes by accident. with Eric who's firstly outright embarrassed but later see how much it means to her. It's just really sweet. Amy doesn't get many storylines on her own. It's great to put her in the spotlight. And the humour is also great in this plot, as Amy writes sexual imagery between her and Anna. So overall, it's a frustrating episode, but it is something to like here. 5 out of 10. 120th now with another poor attempt to write women. I feel like we should have a little drinking game for Corey's audacity and bad writing of women. I mean, the game would never stop. But here we have, with Season 2, Episode 12, The Turnaround. In this twist dance where girls ask out boys, Corey through hijink has to take her nerdy girl. I absolutely love how Topanga just points out the hypocrisy in this whole round thing, because you can see schools actually doing this to try and be progressive, when in actuality it's just more sexist to assume that girls can't ask in the first place. So I like that, but I just can't stand how they treat this nerdy girl. They give her a Sandy-like makeover only for her to become bitchy. But then she changes her mind. Really, every character just sucks here. However, the ending of Corey and the girl reason they could have had a nice time together is sweet. But it's a 5 out of 10 for me. Nothing worth note. 119th all the way to jump to Season 7 now with such a whatever episode. Season 7, Episode 18, How Corey and Topanga Got Their Groove Back. In such a nothing conflict, Corey and Topanga aren't invited to a dangerous event. They feel they're boring and throw a party, only for no one to show up and realise their company is more important than anyone showing up. I'm sorry, I don't care. For the final season, this is so low stakes. I'm just blatant filler. I also feel like the gang are uncharacteristically rude and degrading to the couple. As the episode plays into a stereotype I can't stand in the show, and that paints Corey and Topanga as this elderly married couple. As the couple, especially Season 4 plus, don't actually have a lot of fun, and it kind of frustrates me. And I really don't think I'm alone, unfortunately, in believing that Angela and Sean are just a superior couple. But anyway, I'm jumping the gun a bit there. This episode has a mere B-plot of Eric thinking Sneeze and tells the future of him for revealing the 3 lottery numbers. Apart from Jack's greed, which is paid off in the finale, and this Eric and Jack are just bye moment, where Eric says, Jack, if you were a woman, I think you were pretty suave. The B-plot just doesn't do much for me. It just shows the writers just didn't have a clue of Eric in this series. Overall, it's just a bit The episode is complete filler, 5 out of 10. Now on 118th, an episode that surprised me in a good way, but that's not saying much considering the placement. But still, that episode is Season 1, Episode 14, The B Team for Life. After getting drafted as second string in the basketball team, Corey starts to feel second string in his own family. This is an episode that definitely focuses on the show's visions, showing Corey's isolation as a middle child. And I like how it does point out that Alan isn't perfect in his philosophy as a parent. I like how he rectifies that by travelling to see Corey just to sit on a bench. And we get a really beautiful conclusion there. This episode also contains a scene where Corey steals a chicken from Feeney in Looney Tunes level antics. Really? Did we have to do that? But overall, it's a sweet but not too memorable episode. 5.5 out of 10 for me. 117 is, funny enough, another episode in really similar vein, with Season 1, Episode 11, The Father-Son Game, where Eric and Corey try to avoid a softball game, not really what it really means to their father. I love how selfish and poor they are at hiding their feelings towards this game, and I like how the duo really do learn a great lesson. The episode also raises interesting questions when Topanga refuses to recite the Pledge of Allegiance, and while her argument is valid and well articulated, Corey making a rebuttal based on what he's learned is such a great Michael Jacobs moment. Minkus also steals the show in this episode. And when we're talking to Minkus, let me give you a controversial opinion. Minkus left at the right time. As entertaining and as charismatic as Lee Norris's Minkus was, and iconic he was, he just would not have fit in the superior Season 2 dynamic, and I stand by that, so he had to go, unfortunately. Anyway, I just love to get sidetracked, don't I? Well, I do like this episode. I do think it's a weaker version of Father Knows Best, and because of that, 5.5 out of 10 for me. 116 was Season 1 again, but it just can't fight with the big dogs, can it? With She Loves Me Not, Episode 14. After Eric Matthews, of all people, I don't know how this happened, is somehow nominated to give a lecture to the 6th graders on high school, he gives a lackluster and uninformative presentation. However, after a chat with Feeney, he gives a great one. Meanwhile, Topanga apparently has a crush on Eric? What? And Eric has to teach her the reality? I love Eric in this episode and how mature and respectful he handles the situation, but the episode is just weird. I think Feeney wanted Eric to talk about things like drugs and sex to 6th graders is out of character, considering he scolds Turner so much for the same thing the next season. And Topanga's just purposely naive. It just doesn't work. And Topanga having a thing for Eric is just throwing cats into pigeons. There's the already ever-changing continuity in this show. I mean, if one thing you've got to know about Boy Meets World is that continuity is not one of its strong points. Character consistency, cohesively, they can't get away with it because it's the 90s. However, I must point out Minkus's jealousy is just hilarious and he really steals the show again. But after seeing the whole show, you kind of forget this episode as it is kind of... It should be non-canon, really. It's just sort of pointless. 5.5 out of 10. Finally, 115 now, we finally got a new season with Season 4, Episode 13, The Bed and Breakfast. After Feeney goes away, Sean and Corey are challenged to look after the house, only to turn it into a bed and breakfast. Meanwhile, Eric and Feeney go to the same bar. When on rewatch, this one had more going for it than the concept on paper applies as we learn more about Feeney's fear of loving again, and the latter realising it's never too late for love is nice. I wish it got more focus, however. Eric and Feeney always work as just as unlikely duo and I have a blast with them with the beef plot. However, it's out of character to be involved in this scheme. However, but one thing I do have to give this episode credit for is how somehow the thing that unfolds the planet, the taxi driver ratting him out, was just there. Overall, it was a fun episode, but I think they did hint on some subtext of Feeney there, which we would have delved into more, so I could only give it a 5.5 out of 10. 114th now, with Season 3, Episode 4, He Said, She Said. In this bloated episode, we have an A, B, C and D storyline. I mean, you've got 22 minutes, that's just not a good start, is it? Let's get the bullshit out of the way. We get filler of Eli and Feeney and Eric faking a letter from Feeney, but the main selling point is the B storyline, where Harley returns to face off against Griff, only for Frankie and Joey to go solo. It's a nice moment, and it feels like Frankie and Joey's arc really comes full circle, but the whole Western showdown is just a bit lame and should have been a Season 2 thing. We also find out Harley has been writing death threats to Corey. Like, honestly, get a life, Harley, kinda. But the A-plot has a bit more to discuss. Just not knowing what to do with Sean Hunter, Turner diagnoses Sean to a guidance counsellor, only for it to severely backfire when she floats ideas of going to Europe to Sean. As we get a classic episode of Sean Hunter runs away. That should be during game 2, in fairness. I think this is a good time to discuss the Turner-Sean dynamic, which I'm actually a really big fan of. I like how it really shows them both as flawed characters really trying to do their best. But on rewatch, this dynamic is actually underutilised and isn't fleshed out nearly enough. So I do dig episodes that tackle it. And I like what they're going for here, and I think the guidance counsellor is really interesting. I wish she sort of stayed around, as the whole thing feels rushed. However, the scene at the bus stop is great and really authentic, and I love that emphasis of Turner not being his father but can still play that family role. And I think Boy Meets World does have a really good message of you don't need to be blood to be family, and that couldn't be more the case with Sean Hunter. So overall, it's a messy episode, but it has some good going for it. 5.5 out of 10. 113th now with Season 3 again, with Episode 8, Rave On. An episode that has no right being above half the episodes discussed so far, but it's just so damn entertaining. After forgetting their parents' anniversary, it's the same night as their planned raves. They tried to go to make it a best of both worlds with little success, only to be saved by the monkeys in the end. There's some dumb things in this episode. Eric kisses and dances with his cousin without even recognising each other. That's just bum. I don't buy it. We also have this joke where Eric, which is played with Corey and Eric, where they both say who's the sexy girl in the babe talk, and it's just their mum, and I'm like, no. This episode also gives her Reginald Fairfield, who, unpopular opinion, don't shoot me, but I don't like him. I don't like how low hanging fruit his jokes mocking his accent is, and he just feels so one note. The one joke I do like though is Frankie stealing Amy's watch just to give it to her. That's a great little gag and very in character. I also love the lack of just secretiveness in the advertisement for this rave. Clearly subtlety wasn't Eric's first fault. But let's be honest, this whole episode was written for the Monkeys cameo, which is so earned and feels so natural, and it really bumps the episode up. And I will give the show credit because they do set up two members of the Monkeys prior with Jedediah, of course, is one of them, and the other guys from Alan's band. So they do set out a prayer. They kind of build towards it. I do dig that, but yeah, 112 now with an iconic but with a lack of more adequate phrase mid-episode with season 2 episode 5, The Uninvited, where in a first Corey is invited to a party that Sean isn't, only for the party to be a nerd party for safe people as the girl's parent took off anyone slightly problematic. I'm sorry, but Melissa is just the word. She's spiteful to Corey and just straight up leaves the party's guests, again showing this show can only write one-dimensional women characters. However, what makes this episode work for me is its great Corey-Sean episode. I don't care what you say, this duo makes the show demonstrate a more healthy relationship to strive for than Corey and Topanga. And this episode has a great moment when Sean calls Corey cool. Overall, it's got its problem, but I enjoy it. 6 out of 10. 111th now with season 2, Fear Strikes Out. He is totally not prepared for a make-out party. And I like how it demonstrates the peer pressure and underlying fear. And just Corey's clearly evident lack of maturity. Corey and Topanga's scene in the closet is nothing short of beautiful as Topanga admits that she too is scared. And this is the Corey and Topanga I root for. This episode also introduced Miss Tompkins, a nice girl who literally had no personality. Generally her only character traits that she's like, but does raise an interesting question, I guess, of the morality of dating teachers. Overall, it's just a pretty standard episode, but with a nice Corey and Topanga moment. 6 out of 10. 110th now, we've got an iconic one. Hey, please forgive me for this placement. Season 3 episode 21, This Happier Place on Earth. When Corey realised that breaking up with Topanga was a mistake, he travels to Disney World to win her back. Okay, this episode is filled with some hilarious running gags and a B-plot where Eric dragged the life-size Corey around. And Disney World is obviously a really fun environment, although not very accurate to what you can actually do in the parks. Like, the authenticity is missing there. However, where this episode really fools me is how they completely butcher the message. So Topanga calls Corey out for all his big gestures and makes it a Prince Jasmine-like impression, so she isn't a prize to be won, and hates it when boys chase her. However, instead of changing and being honest, Corey goes to talk to a literal dolphin in a moment that's too cheesy even for Disney, just for Topanga to completely backtrack and realise the gesture did come from the heart. So yes, the fireworks scene is iconic, and yes, it's a great moment, but it does not have my frustration. So overall, it's a fun episode that has some great stuff, but they try to make a statement only to completely disregard it. Breathe, Lewis. 109th now with Corey's audacity back. However, Topanga doesn't stack up much better in this one, with Season 6, Episode 20, The Truth About Honesty. When something as simple as sharing a razor causes a massive roadblock for the couple. In reaction to this, the couple decide to be honest with each other, only for a lot of tea to come out. Meanwhile, Jack and Rachel through their first party and play an honesty game, and in a C storyline, Eric lies to a girl about Joshua being his kid. I just don't care about that. So the themes here, obviously, honesty. Let's start with Corey and Topanga. When this show was on Team Corey with his whole razor thing, for Corey to call out Topanga, having a strive to always be perfect, and Topanga rightfully points out that she gave up Yale for him. Don't worry, we're going to get to that later. It's diabolical and so inconsiderate. The episode really demonstrates the trend of Season 6 and visualities of why these two are just too young to get married. This episode does also give us the first canon time Corey sees Topanga's bum, which I think important to note there. Plot with Andrew and Sean having a one night talking makeout is great and demonstrates there's still unresolved feelings there. Jack and Rachel also prove they just lack all compatibility. And don't get me started with Eric, the whole thing feels like a Season 3 Eric scheme that's pointless. So overall, there is something here, and it opens some good discussions, but it's a mixed episode, 6 out of 10. 108th now, we have our second season finale with Season 4, Episode 22, Learning. Where Corey and Eric both have different, yet at the root similar issues, as Eric fears finally going to college. Meanwhile, Topanga lies to Corey about going to a beach house. This episode frustrates me. It has some moments that are so good, but a few things that just knock it down for me. Corey is seduced by Mary Beth, this vulnerable girl who crosses the line with Corey again. Another one-dimensional guest star. I hate everything we do with her, and I'm sorry, but Corey's sexual drive is in full swing here. He had so much time to leave that room, and he didn't. And he doesn't. Sean got out of it, and you didn't, Corey. I also don't like how degraded of Topanga Corey is. Like, yes, she lied, but you have to have a lot of empathy for her lack of trust in herself and a night alone with you. However, what saves this episode is the last 10 minutes. Eric's conversation with Corey basically saying, are you really going to throw away a lifelong relationship for this night? It really brings up the chart and the best side of Eric, only for Corey to twist it onto Eric, making him realise he has to take the interview is incredible. And wow, Eric speaks to Ding Dong, really making his character come full circle is incredible. So overall, a frustrated episode, but Mary Beth really is putting this one down for me. Not my favourite finale, but it's still enjoyable. 6 out of 10. 107 now is a really interesting episode. It's season 2, episode 4, Me and Mr. Joe. Now, funny enough, the Pod Meets World episode for this just came out and they hated it. But I'm a bit nicer to it. After Turner backtracks on a cancellation of a test, Corey leads a strike that backfires. I always enjoy episodes featuring the Feeney-Turner dynamic that hold traditionalism versus the new generation. And both arguments are valid here. It's always good when an episode doesn't have an obvious right person. Corey is very naive here, but he is technically right and rightfully upset. However, the strike is poorly executed, as I feel like the gang kind of lose what they were actually striking for halfway through. This episode also sees Turner going into the Matthews house, asking for advice, again pushing that sort of suspension of disbelief, which is what I don't like. What I really don't like, though, is the B storyline with Eric and Desiree. This manipulative girl who takes advantage of Eric and makes him pick between her and Jason. Only for him to break up with her, only for Jason to call him a clown and basically say it's the biggest mistake he ever made. Like, I'm sorry, she had no redeemable qualities. You were absolutely in the right here. But overall, the episode's fine. 6 out of 10. 106 now, and we're back to the Topanga and Corey third breakup with season 7, episode 4, No Such Thing as a Short Film. If anything, when I saw this, I was just relieved the whole thing was over. I love how Topanga's mum comes and rightfully calls out the hypocrisy that you can't compare relationship, and I really like what that actor actually brings to the role of Topanga's mum. But the whole thing just feels a bit recycled to me this episode. Corey dating another girl post-breakup and being uncomfortable. Like, we've done this before to better effect in season 3 and 5. And the episode's B-plot is also frustrating. After Feeney won't let the star player play Deuce Paul Grave, Eric and Jack bet heavily on the other school, only for Feeney to change his mind. And I'm sorry, but Eric accidentally making Feeney rethink his decision while trying to make him double down is just brilliant. Eric is genuine on another planet in this one. Eric tries to jump forward on a trampoline and goes backwards. He's just a full cartoon character at this point. However, my issue with this plot is the play betting and imply Jack doing this constantly is played as a joke when risky business. Like, mind you, a season 1 episode does a way better job in handling the seriousness of a gambling plotline. And that's season 1. So I'm glad we got this episode so Corey and Topanga are finally back together so we can do the wedding, but Jesus, it was not great. Still infinitely better than the bloody first 2 episodes though. It's frustrating though. 6 out of 10. 105th now, what a surprise! Another episode of Corey's Audacity with season 5, episode 7, Better Than Your Average Corey. After meeting a child prodigy, Corey feels a bit deflated and feels sort of worthless, only for him to call out Alan and get his eyes open to the struggles Alan went through to get him to this privileged position. I love the focus on kids not appreciating what parents have done, and that scene where Alan takes Corey to his father's unappealing workplace is incredible. But Corey, man, his behaviour, it's just disgusting. I get seeing a prodigy can be deflating, but Corey is so selfish and entitled in his view, and for him to blame Alan is ridiculous, and his half-assed apology is not earned in the slightest. It also brings in this child prodigy who's apparently the same age as Morgan, which is actually true, but there's an unfortunate height difference there, and come on, you could have put Morgan in a box, make this a bit more believable, guys. It also just doesn't help that the show sort of failed to define Morgan in any way past the first season, so she still resorted to colouring at the table. So while I appreciate them utilising Lindsay's great singing voice, it just comes out of nowhere. And of course, Corey comes and physically overshadows Morgan's big moment. Such great symbolism about the show not only treats Morgan, but just women in general. So it was a frustrating episode, but there's some really good standout moments in it. So 6 out of 10 for me. 104th now. Who would have guessed? Corey's Audacity is back with season 6, episode 16, My Baby Valentine. After their Valentine's Day doesn't go to plan due to Amy literally going into labour, Corey is straight up horrible to Topanga and Amy. Corey is so out of line here. And Topanga driven in the tragic and true fact that things change. Accept it. Corey's earnest attempt at a baby shower is just pathetic, and he just doesn't get it. I really don't like how everyone in this episode is just mocking Amy in such a low-hanging fruit way. Like, oh, I get it, she's fat, it's a pregnant woman. Like, it's just insulting, and it's not even that funny, really. How in the end it does save this episode. But even as his baby brother is being born, all Corey can focus on is wants. Oh, this boy is infuriating. There's a couple of quotes I need to address. Firstly, there's a scene with Amy and Morgan that's like, when she's like, I'm going to make the next 6 weeks about you, only for Walters to break mere moments later. That really just does sum up how this show treats Morgan. Also, in an Eric and Jack, they're just by moment, we get this quote, you don't like girls, I kind of thought, I just had to mention that. Overall, this episode's fine, but Corey is just the worst. 6 out of 10. 103rd now. And Corey gets to catch a break in this one. He's not too bad, actually. As it's season 4, episode 10, Turkey Day. With another case of good concept, bad execution. After winning a turkey, Sean and Corey decide to bring their families together for Thanksgiving. However, due to class differences, their intensive awkwardness. This episode is fascinating and covers an issue unfortunately still relevant today. However, I really don't like the execution. While I won't criticise the intentional awkwardness, however, all our 4 adults just suck here. And they're not giving it a chance, and Verna in particular is just acting inhuman and so obnoxious. There's some interesting subtext here, like Alan mistaking the hunters for hunters. However, a lot of the jokes are just out of character on both parties. However, the worst part of this episode is this whole the traders resident ganging together to kick the Matthews out in such a childish way. Like, for such a mature and serious topic of class differences, to have this like Saturday morning villains, like, oh. And I don't get why they have such an issue with the Matthews being there. It's so weird considering Corey is there constantly. There's also, it's just blatant lazy writing. I love seeing the kids finding a way to enjoy it and just really teaching the parents and showing that they really do nothing. And Sean's final essay is great. Overall on paper this could have been a top 20 episode, but really fails in the execution. 6.5 out of 10. 102nd hour of an episode I'm shocked climbs this high. Season 5 episode 19, Eric Hollywood. For a change of pace in the midst of the deep lore inside, Eric goes to Hollywood where he gets casted and kids get acquainted with the universe. While this episode writing is weak and you can clearly pick hold with how we get here, I don't care. And you can excuse this one as this was clearly a cast blast of the cast and is a complete meta episode, which is very rare for the time. There's so many great meta lines, like this one by Corey. Is a personal How could I learn so much every week and still be so stupid? I love it. Fake Corey in this is quite amusing, and to be honest, not that far from the real life Ben Savage. Sorry, Ben. You can really break this one down and rip into it, but I don't feel like it be necessary, as this is bonkers intentionally. However, where this works is where something like the Teenage Spy episode fails, is that the B story actually focuses on what it means for Tori and Topanga now that she's broke up with Corey. So yeah, there is something there. They tried a little bit, unlike Singled Out. The more I think about Singled Out, the worse it gets to me. In my heart, this is a 10 out of 10, but being critically, it's a 6.5 out of 10. 101st now, and just missing out the top 100 is our first Christmas episode, with season 1 episode 10, Santa's Little Helper, not to be confused with Santa's Little Helpers from season 6, creativity. After Sean's father losing his job, Corey learns what Christmas really is all about. This episode is so important, and it's the first to really highlight Sean's financial situation, and is so well foreshadowed and effective. And any episode that helps define the show's best character is definitely a win in my book. I love the conversation Alan has with Corey about not boasting in his gifts, and Corey's naivety and his misinterpretation, only to learn a great lesson from Feeney is great. I also like the emphasis the episode puts on the sad trajectory of the commercialisation the holiday has become. Overall, a really touching episode, but we do only scratch the surface as it's season 1. We also get a bit of a nothing B storyline with Morgan thinking she's killed Santa, which Yeah, I could have done without that, to be honest. Overall, it's a sweet episode, and the first 7 out of 10 for me. Breaking into the top 100 with Season 2, Episode 3, Notorious. As an attempt at popularity, Sean edits the school newspaper from Feeney to Weenie. After Feeney works out Corey was at the scene, Corey must face the decision between the right thing and ratting out a friend. I find it amusing how the boys fail to read how lame this not very elaborate prank is. Like, you've changed a letter on a thing and no one knows it's you. And Harley's less than enthusiastic reaction is just golden and extremely accurate. This is a short but effective episode that puts Corey in a relatable situation. I face this sort of thing a lot at Corey's age, and I'm glad the show subverts the usual, with Feeney actually admiring Corey sticking up for his friend. The B storyline is weak with Eric and Desiree, but I've already explained prior why this doesn't work. It's not funny. Desiree is nothing but a manipulative to control and bitch. Overall, it's an average episode. 7 out of 10. It's fun, but it's not something you're going to remember. 99, single digits now, with Season 2 again with Band on the Run. In a typical lie reveal plotline, Sean and Corey lie about being in a band to impress some girl. Lie reveals I actually don't mind. Where the tropes can be reinvented, and I don't mind as long as it's done well. It's a fun episode. I love how Turner or Feeney don't even try to teach lessons to boys. They just laugh at them. There's so much depth here, but we're given a good Corey and Topanga moment. This episode is higher than others because there's nothing really offensive about it. It's fine. And seeing Alan and his old bandmates is definitely a treat. Overall, the episode's fine. 7 out of 10. Now, coming in 98th with Season 3, we've got The Last Temptation of Corey. Due to Corey being taken, he now has the scent, and girls want him more than ever. After being invited to a party, he's seduced by Missy Roberts. The whole thing just feels like male fantasy. Missy is just this complete bitch who has no characteristic and is straight up committing assault. Imagine Corey was doing this to a girl and the roles were reversed. I also like how the show villainizes the father when him coming in actually kind of saves the day. And as for Corey, I'm sorry, but he just makes such minimal attempt to escape there. They do this a lot in the show where it's like, oh, Corey, you know, he was trapped. He tried to escape. He's innocent. When he stayed way longer than he should have, and Topanga forgives him way too easily. The B-plot also shows that Eric's fallen from magazine scam and Feeney Connolly like character. A character I haven't actually mentioned yet. Bloody hell, how did they write a character more pointless than Morgan? No, I like Eli. Do I? I don't really remember. Overall, the episode is fine. It's not very rewatchable. The whole thing just feels like a setup for the joke, Missy Robinson, you're seducing me, which is clever. 7 out of 10, move on. 97th now, with Season 3 again, with Episode 14, A Kiss is More Than a Kiss. Post-breakup, Corey struggles to move past Topanga and date other girls. Meanwhile, Eric continues to strive for college. This episode is another example of Corey's audacity as he's rude and unreasonable to Topanga. These two are broken up. You hear that in the back row? They are broken up. Topanga can kiss who she wants. However, I do dig the conversation moving on and Corey's low mood. I also find it comical how ashamed Corey is for not kissing on the first date, which now would just be common normality. That definitely did take me to the time period we were in. However, the resolution is sweet, and Corey does learn his lesson, which I think is better than other. And the reason I can't get so angry with Lasty is this is Season 3, as compared to he's not in college yet. Some ways more were. This episode also brings in the new Morgan, and her instant impact is definitely felt with this quote. That was the longest time I ever had. I pretty much for the terrible Morgan impression. Another hot take for you. I actually preferred the second Morgan, as Lindsay always felt a lot more aware of sort of what she was doing. Anyways, it's great. Eric's plot definitely helps lift this episode up as he gets a letter from a fake school and we go into Eric's fears of not being good enough. And one of my favourite Feeney quotes. I'm very pleased that getting into college means something to you. And that very spirit might get you there. Overall, this episode proves that Topanga is just too good for Corey. A 10. 96 now, and wow, Corey's with Dusty! It's back with Season 7 Episode 13, The Provider, where Topanga and Corey both get jobs to quite contrast from success. With Topanga flourishing and Corey failing to sell one magazine. Instead of being supportive, he has what is proclaimed as their first fight, in the words of George Feeney, that's a bold-faced lie, where Corey calls Topanga out and crosses the line. Wouldn't you know, another episode where Corey fails to applaud his friend's achievement. I get it's deflating, but work hard, get a job for you. It's not Topanga's fault you suck at selling a magazine. And for him to call Topanga out for always having to be perfect. It's so ridiculous. The pan gave up yell for him. She does not shove her talent all over him. I would talk the B plot line, but it's no better, as Eric thinks he's got a lucky penny as he helps a guy come out. I'm just, no, what are we doing here? I just roll my eyes at most of what Eric does in this season. Although Wilfred Out always aces it, it's just so sad what they're doing with him. Overall, just a frustrating episode. But there are some elements I like, so 7 out of 10. 95th, I'm not even joking. Corey's audacity is in question again for the third episode running, with season 6, episode 3, Ain't College Great, where carefree Corey puts no thought into his college classes, so he has to see a retired Feeney to save his ass. You gotta love how the show wastes so little time before bringing Feeney, but I actually really like the Feeney stuff, as he realises he's more than Wyoming, and he can still find joy as a college professor. That's really good. I'm actually really not a fan of Sean in this episode, which is out of the norm because I'm quite a Sean, as he's my favourite character. But he's such a deadbeat about college and complaining about the dorm. Everything you know about Sean and some of the places he's had the misfortune of staying in. Having a place that's permanent with his best friend, he should be so over the moon about that. And it's so frustrating. I do love how the gang completely get Corey out of jail though and save his ass. My selfishness thinks Corey should have really been stuck with the reality. We get a B plot as well, as Eric and Jack apparently are both only funny and sensitive, and Rachel teaches them a lesson. I just don't think Rachel should have took that risk. And the episode really illustrates a big problem with the show. Rachel, who honestly in retrospect feels like she was just thrown in to deflate Eric and Jack's sexual tension. But she's nothing but a sexual symbol for me, and they never do a good job at defining her purpose in the story. There's a whole episode about her pointlessness called The War. I mean, that doesn't say it all it does. Overall, this episode has this moment, but Corey and the B-pop bring it down. 7 out of 10. 94th now with season 4 episode 14, Wheels, which might as well be Corey's audacity. It's close, it's dangerously close, but Alan's just as bad, so we'll get to it anyway. When Corey goes to get his driving licence with his friend, Alan is upset he didn't go with him. This was the episode I was alluding to earlier when talking about Eric happily getting his licence with Jason, and Alan just didn't care. So my big issue here is I hate both parties. They're both childish and fail to compromise. Although I do appreciate painting Alan as a human, he's way too petty here. Like, how was he supposed to just expect Corey? But Corey's no better, and his actions later on in the episode and his refusal to call his dad is just as bad. What the episode works to be is the underlying message of growing up and Alan's fear of losing his children, which is something we play on quite a lot in the show. And the card symbolises that metaphor really well. Overall, this episode is very similar in execution to Turkey Day. Good concept, execution poor. 7 out of 10 for me. And in 93rd, we have an example of an average episode. Season 3, episode 5, Hometown Hero. After being falsely proclaimed a hero, Corey lets fame go to his head and must face the hard job of telling the truth. This episode is, I would describe as entry-level Boy Meets World. We have a conflict, raise, a feeling lesson and a change of heart, but the episode isn't much to write home about really. When I dig an episode about fame going to someone's head, I find the ridiculous lack of fact-checking here just so ridiculous. And also, I hate how the duo never get charged for the double jeopardy crime of trespassing and starting a fire. However, putting those aside, it's a fine episode. It's decent. 7 out of 10. 92nd now of an episode that was almost incredible but had some glaring issues with season 5 episode 4 Franity Row, where Sean, feeling lost, starts to take college courses only to get suspended from school. This episode does a great job of visualising that the ability is there for Sean and showing he is college standard, and despite the fact he gets an A, he has all the right material, he just needs to work on the structure. I also like how Feeney doesn't backtrack on the ban either with the quote, he suspended himself. If he wanted to join the others, failing to live up to is his choice. And while we've seen this idea previously of students failing to live up to potential, it works here so well. And I think it's important, I might as well point out that the actor who plays the college professional in there would later go on to play Andrew the father. I'm personally glad he came back because I really enjoyed his performance here. The B plot is what brings this down, where Eric and Jack throw in a legal party and what the only payoff is a weak studio level Love Boat cameo, which is one of those things I feel like you need to see Love Boat to get it, but I just didn't get anything from it. 7 out of 10 for me. 91st now, we're back to season 7 with episode 17, she's having Baby Rose back. After feeling overweight due to unrealistic standards of her friends, Topanga goes on a diet only for the cast to think she's pregnant. What really doesn't work for me is how no one consults Topanga and just makes assumptions behind her back. This whole thing could have been avoided and cleared up in mere seconds, but then again we wouldn't have an episode. And it's just really shitty for everyone to assume. However, what lifts this episode up for me is the emphasis on peer pressure leading to body shaming and social standards, which is even more relevant today than it was in the year of 2000, and something I personally, I know many people have faced. And I'd love to see an episode on it. And Feeney says one of my top 5 favourite quotes of the whole show in this episode. Unfortunately, we live in a society where we're told to look a certain way. Because of that, we're left to live up to unrealistic expectation. And it's so sad that Topanga, who was once so proud of herself and not scared of what people thought in Corey's alternative friend, has fallen to peer pressure. And I wish the focus was on that over another line reveal plot that feels like something they should have done if they did a season 8. I wish this episode was better because I really like the subject matter, but it is decent, I guess. 7 out of 10. Coming in 90th, we're in the middle of Angela's Sean cutting the cord. I think this episode gives me a good chance to give my thoughts on Sean and Angela. I think the fact that Sean and Angela hasn't showed up yet kind of says it all, but I've expressed prior my view that Angela and Sean are a superior and more realistic couple. For me, they're way more authentic, realistic and healthy, and I always enjoy how they're honest and open. And Angela always has more mature, nuanced takes that really bring out the best in Sean, and I really like their dynamic. This episode is iconic. After a restraining order is put on Corey and Topanga to not interfere, Angela and Sean decide to move on. However, Sean is mostly miserable. I find it extremely hilarious that even the show knows that this, while well-intentioned, is just such a nuisance, and the restraining order is just brilliant. This episode is course remembered for the great karaoke scene. Let's talk about all 3 of these performances. For Angela and Ron, I love Ron. I love how he absolutely kills it, and he must have known he was a guest star and just decided to kill it. For Sean and Katie, damn, Ryder can sing. You do not know what I do to hit a rider so Hellman, trust me. Topanga, yeah, the lesser the better. Who am I kidding? What is it good for? Absolutely nothing. Say it again. Well, such an out of left field song. It's just hilarious. I've got to give credit to Katie and give her the reward for the most understanding date of all time. It really demonstrates again that women can only be one of 3 things in this show. However, I enjoy the episode for what it is. The B plot is also decent but underwhelming, showcasing Alan's sudden fear that he won't keep up with his new child. And when I don't like him buying a bike instead of confronting Amy, the underlying message is good, but I wish we got more focus on this plot. Overall, really fun episode, but far from a standout. 7 out of 10. Coming in 89. Oh no. We had the absolute boiling point of Corey's audacity. Season 5, episode 23. Things change. This and one more episode, which we're yet to get to, Jesus Christ, bring out the worst of Corey. As graduation nears, everything starts to change for Corey. Feeney's moving, Sean may not go to college, and Topanga's acceptance to Yale. This episode shows such an unlikable protagonist. Corey is so selfish and childish. People around him achieving great things, and he's failing to congratulate them. Let's start with Sean. I'm glad the show shows alternative college, and I love that Feeney for it, and I wish they didn't abruptly drop this storyline. Yes, I know this was because they thought they'd lose Riser, but it makes sense for Sean. A fall in college would be a struggle for someone like Sean, and he's great at this job, and Corey degrading him for this is just so horrible. I cannot believe he reacts the way he does to Topanga getting to Yale. This is a major achievement, and he's so salty. Topanga should have dropped on the spot, especially considering other things he does in this season, which, don't worry, we'll get to it. His coldness is so unwarranted. Eric says a quote in the end that really demonstrates the reality of what Corey's doing. Good things that happen to your friends, Corey. You should be happy for them. If you're not, what kind of a friend are you? Eric, despite Corey's audacity, this episode sets a lot of things up, and it is really important. I really like what they do with Sean. 7 out of 10. 88th now with the one that started it all. Season 1, episode 1 pilot. It's very difficult to rate the pilot in respect, because there's an argument to be made that it should be number 1. It's the episode that establishes the show, and if it flopped, the show would have never become my favourite TV show of all time. However, this was such a difficult one to gauge, but I tried to judge it with the same metric as everything else, and tried to say it as just say it was season 1, episode 11. From episode 1, we nailed the tone and dynamic, focusing on love and Romeo and Juliet, and Corey's poor understanding is so thematic. As we know down the line, love will be the only thing that makes sense to him. I love that. By the end, the episode's main plot is with Eric, as Corey must deal with the realities of growing up when Corey takes a date to a baseball game over Corey. The simple concept that leads to a great one-on-one conversation between Feeney and Corey with this quote: "There's no better aspiration than love, Mr. Matthew." Amy gives a great speech. As pilots go, this is a really solid. However, it's rightfully overthrown by most of his predecessors. I mean, the pilot was the strongest episode. You've not got a great show. 87th now with season 5, episode 3. It's Not You, It's Me. After Corey applies for a college Sean doesn't believe he can feasibly get into, he completely freaks out and tries to abandon Corey. Well, on paper, I like this episode, and I like how we're diving into Sean's worst fears, and we again see how much he looks down on himself, only to see how Corey's the sole thing saving Sean constantly. However, I feel Sean's take this to the extreme seam and does overact and goes overboard too quickly. I also find the friend that Corey makes Lionel just so out of place. And what really ruins this episode for me is the constant jokes about the duo's intimacy. The show has a running gag that Corey and Sean are as close as you can get without being an actual couple. Sometimes this can be really funny and entertaining. However, in such a heavyweight storyline, it's out of place. And Topanga has a quote that is just blatant character assassination. After the boys do a retell of their backstory, they embrace and a hug, and Topanga says, "Stop it, your boy." This is a tone killer that absolutely goes against everything Topanga's character stands for. As we've seen in Affair to Forget, we see how highly she values the importance of Corey and Sean's relationship, and for her to say that in this climate really rubbed me the wrong way. I'm sorry for maybe analysing a minimal, just poor joke, but this frustrated me. We also have a B-plot where Eric and Jack try to build a relationship with the new dean in the same vein of Feed to Little Fair. It's entertaining, but there's not a lot going on here. Overall, this could have been a great episode, but Sean's overreaction, the out of placeness of Rhino, and Topanga's blatant character assassination ruins it for me. 7 out of 10. 86 now, we've got to a great example of how to do a Studio Net episode with Season 4, Episode 19, Quiz Show. After appearing on an academic quiz show, after making the show entertaining, the show quickly changes and loses everything it originally was. What could have been another singled out is an episode that really illustrates the truth behind the sad modern state of TV. I love how they show that the show slowly loses its integrity as the show gets bigger and more absurd. I love Feeney's rant, it's so powerful. A generation of verbal and mathematic ability is sunk when you have the easiest access to knowledge. And he's spot on, the writing's so clever. Have a gang of thrown at the moment they just raise a subtle concern, and it's so accurate to how real life producers act. It's fascinating how dehumanised the show became, and in the end, Sean intentionally loses only to be replaced with a more hip trio. It just says it all. And this episode is so much better than it has any right to be, and I really love what they did here. It's not perfect, I don't like how they kind of shit on geek culture a bit too much, but 7 out of 10 for me. Quality episode. 85th now, back in Season 2 with Episode 19, The Wrong Side of the Tracks. After a girl refuses to date Sean due to his background, Sean falls in with the wrong group. Okay, let's get the glaring elephant out of the room. This episode contains a different actor playing Harley Kiner, and he just does not work. Well, still more realistic Harley himself, he just lacks all the personality, and is really distracting. But I get it wasn't the writer's fault, and of course the Harley's actor had a breakdown on set, and they had to do what they could. We see a strand that starts with this episode of Sean joining the wrong crowd, only to be rescued by Corey. And I love how they handle this. Sean is very impressionable at this age, and you can see how the words of this girl really killed him inside. And he's had to deal with poverty his whole life, and this student is believable and authentic. This episode also is really the first to explore the Sean and Turner dynamic, and the dynamic works overall. Not the best episode for Sean, as the bar's so high for them. And Not My Harley definitely takes me out of it, but it's still a solid episode. 7 out of 10. 84th now, we have an iconic one. It's Season 4, Episode 2, Hair Today, Gone Tomorrow. To help her self-conscious Corey, Topanga cuts her hair to prove a point of inner beauty, only for her to see she's always had pretty privilege, never had to really worry about appearance, she's just as self-conscious deep down as Corey. This episode really signifies the death of quirky Topanga, and I love what we do with her here, and her conversation with Sean in the bathroom is so beautiful. However, the way Corey and Sean act towards Topanga is not to steer her away from her going against her mere ideology. It's so that they can apparently compete on her beauty level wise, which is the complete wrong way to tackle it. There's a moment in this episode where Sean basically asks Topanga out, and there's a moment where he implies a polymonious relationship. What are we doing here? When he goes, I think the three of us could be good together. The jokes are just so dumb sometimes in this show. Anyway, the B plot is iconic in its own right. As a sloth like Eric, instead of getting a job, creates his own spy show with a legendary theme song. When a crime gets set out, the cuckoo says shall get a good looking guy. When there's a crime out there, he's gonna comb his hair, cause he's a good looking guy. Ooh, good looking guy. Sorry, it's in my head, However, the big story does have some substance, as Eric gets his eye open to his privileges as he dates a town in a much worse predicament, which is a defining moment for Eric. So overall, despite the aforementioned flaws, it's a solid episode, 7 out of 10. 83rd now, and we're in season 7 with episode 10, Picket Fence. Despite its poor conditions, Corin Topanga must... Tory. I was trying to say Corin Topanga and I said Tory. Corey does that, Tory, like, to be fair. Must get used to it. Corey and Topanga must get used to it. I love that the show tackled what happens post-marriage and the difficulty. This whole plot line is so real, and I love that Sean points out the positives of the lackluster dorm, which again gives me even more reason to find him complaining about the college dorm so ridiculous. Corey fixing the tap is a great moment, and Topanga helping out the single mum next door is so very in character. The conclusions are great. I even like Sean and Angela's story, where Sean feels like the apartment isn't earned for him, with a great quote. I haven't had a lot of things that belong to me. When they come to me, I really want to hold on to them. Sean Hunter. Overall, it's just a solid episode, 7.5 out of 10. 82nd now, with season 2 episode 16 on the air. Corey and Sean create a radio station with what starts as something of substance quickly turns into a school drama show. This is just prime Corey and Sean's schemes. They get Warp on Feeney here, but they also let Turner down in a proper learning curve. I love the lesson here, and the boys have a voice, that the boys do have a voice for something interesting. That would be intriguing, as we see the Turner Feeney dynamic in full swing, with Turner getting the last laugh in the end. Overall, a fun episode with a good lesson. I don't have much wrong with it. 7.5 out of 10. 81st episode where Corey's audacity is sort of here, not really. It's more Alan's fault here. With season 5 episode 12, Raging Corey. Corey and Eric both start to feel that Alan only values them for one reason. Eric for active thing and Corey for serious confrontation. I really like that Alan is wrong here, and Amy calls him out that he's making a mistake. And it's true. One thing that frustrates me is imagine complaining about how his dad treats him in front of Sean. Like, read the room. It's like going to your lack of food in the cupboard to an African. It's like... But this episode does have some great moments. I love the plane scene in the sky. Everything comes from it. It's entertaining, a great way of presenting the scene with great balance of humour and the message. It's a proper learning moment for Alan. Eric getting that moment as well in the music, where he correctly identified the meaning of painting, which showcases that Eric does have intelligence, just not in the traditional system. It's just so great. I also really like the B story with Jack and Sean sharing a room for brothers. They don't get many scenes together for brothers. I feel like the show forgets that fact a lot. But it shows a good mix of sibling bickering and eventually reaching a mutual ground. So overall, it's a really well written episode, but it's far from perfect. 7.5 out of 10. TF loud, this placement will annoy a fair few people. It's a very iconic episode, season 3 episode 1, My Best Friend's Girl. After the summer, Corey is absolutely infatuated with Topanga, but can't ask her out. So Sean has to step in with the help of Trini to get them together. First off, rip Brittany Murphy. I mean, I wish I could say she had more of an impact in the show. Unfortunately, Trini is just every Brittany Murphy character. Okay, this episode is iconic. The ending's great, but the writers had to pick the most convoluted way to get the couple together. This plan was a severe risk and could have easily gone south, considering Topanga was not in on it. The bait and switch to create false fake drama is just kind of lazy. The episode also jokes about Coach Frank in a trans coach. While they never say anything wrong about being trans, the jokes imply. Eric's beat putting on a film is sort of late. Film festival thing is also sort of lame. It's overall a mixed episode, but it does include my second favourite Boy Meets World quote of all time. Topanga, If I had to come up with the perfect girl, she wouldn't even come close to you. What a banger of a line, Corey Matthews. So overall, it's iconic, but it's a mess. 7.5 out of 10. 79th now was Season 3, Episode 18, Life Lessons. After the students believed the final schedule was too tight, the students' protests through Corey will eventually escalate to the point they vandalise Feeney's house, taking it way too far. I love how this show shows the blatant hypocrisy. The students wasted 2 weeks, but they could have been studying. They knew the schedule. This should... And Turner even hearing them out, for me, was genuine. And they don't have a leg to stand on. And Feeney's spot on. He says a great quote, which I've not noted down, but he's like, yeah, if they made the questions easier, it would be easier if we gave them a year to do it. If there was no test at all. And his point is spot on. My big issue with this episode is the gang in this episode. They're poorly acted and extremely ineffective and lack present. However, despite my overwhelming negativity, where this episode really works is how it humanises Feeney. I love episodes that do that. When he feels he can't gain humans' respect and considers retirement only for Corey, Sean and Topanga to rescue Feeney. And we really get the sense that these three kids are the reason Feeney stays. I also love the emphasis on the whole being a bystander isn't enough, and Corey and Sean could have done something. This episode is also another one with Sean hanging out with the wrong crowd, only to really see the reality of what they're doing. The moment where he stands up to the gang is just such a great moment. The one thing I hate in this is the B story, and where Eric dates Amy's 30-year-old friend, where the friend is looking at hung up baby pictures of Eric and making marks, and I'm just like, oh, imagine a gender swap when 18-year-old Topanga dates Turner. Yeah, now you see it. So for what would have been like an 8.5 or a 9, I reduced it all the way to a 7.5 for this atrocious B story, which is probably my least favourite plotline in the whole show. So it's not a perfect episode, but I love some of the stuff they were doing there. 78th now, we're back to season 1 with episode 30, Risky Business. For a school assignment, the boys have to create a business, and Corey and Sean do this by betting on a horse. And they win. This makes the boys make more risk, only to make a massive risk when Corey leaves Morgan on her own. This is a really fun episode, and it brings out the iconic handshake that was completely improvised, for me or not. However, it's great that even in season 1 they were talking issues as serious as gambling. The message is so well done, and I like how Feeney isn't outright putting his foot down, but does make the boys remember that the bigger the risk, the higher the reward. I do find it amusing that most adults would severely benefit from watching this, but other shows just wouldn't tackle it, and the metaphor with Morgan just really worked. And that's the scene with Corey and Morgan in the treehouse is so sweet and just a proper Michael Jacobs moment. And Corey's final conclusion is great. I could have done without the B plot with Amy accidentally going to the wrong anniversary place, but overall, 7.5 out of 10. And now we have an episode I cannot believe got this high. It's season 4, episode 5, Shadow Boy. When Eric makes a mistake where he dates a songwriter, meanwhile in a B plotline, Topanga has to babysit and Corey lacks authority and plays more of the fun uncle role, leading Topanga to panic. Let's get this big storyline out of the way. For me, Topanga is unreasonable for once. Corey's an immature 15-year-old. Of course he's going to be clueless with children. So in a rare case, I'm Team Corey, and trust me, the more I go through this, the more I realise how much of a rare thing that is. This A plot is so pointless and completely adds nothing to season 4, but I don't care. It's so fun and iconic. I find it amazing how they paint that this girl must be goth and can only sing about heartbreak, when you can't call it unrealistic when the likes of Taylor Swift or Olivia Rodrigo have made their whole career this. And both songs are absolute bops, especially Loser Freak. And Morgan absolutely says it. He's a loser freak, he's a woman hand and never, he's a man, loser freak. However, there is a problematic line of painting gay people apparently scared of women, which, yeah, that one didn't exactly age too well. Maybe don't sing that too loud. But overall, I actually found this episode really amusing. As someone who, of course, is a songwriter who has written songs about exes, and I always find it interesting, kind of the idea of how do people who have songs written by big pop stars react? How do all the men that Taylor Swift does date react every time the new single comes out? So I do appreciate them doing that. 76th now, we're finally talking the Lauren arc. Let's go with season 5, episode 20, Starry Night. Just not understanding how a kiss cannot mean anything. Has to date another girl to realise Corey's the only guy for her. This episode finally closes this saga, and that moment in the park does feel so earned, and it's incredibly iconic. However, I have a glaring flaw with this episode. I hate how the show compares what Topanga did to Corey. The circumstances are so different. Corey cheated and lied, and while they were together, and then had to date this girl again to verify his feeling. Well, Topanga is dating an interesting guy. Well, they're broken up. Do you hear that, Michael Jacobs? They are broken up. How the show here and in future episodes will use this to show that they want an equal pedestal when it's so obvious he isn't, and just really puts Topanga in this damsel in distress notion. Is so frustrating. However, I am Team Corey when Topanga needs Corey to explain a painting for Topanga to see how she feels about him. The show rightfully points out how ridiculous Topanga is there. Angela is great in this episode as well, and she works really great off of Angela, and I love the fact that she's encouraging Topanga to date this guy. However, this guy fails to have the same charisma that Lauren has and comes off as a really creepy, if anything. When he apparently remembers Topanga from when he was 6. I don't like this guy. However, this episode does include one of the best Corey lines. I ain't gonna kill you, Sean. It would take way too much effort to build another best friend. Overall, I always enjoyed the Lauren arc and the drama it brought to the show, and the conclusion is definitely worth it. However, I hate what the show did. 75th now, and it's a weird one. Season 7, episode 14, I'm going to be like you, Dad. Alan having no faith in Eric's future gives him a safe job in the store. Meanwhile, Corey thinks he's going to die because of a magazine. I can't stand this B storyline. But what I do love is the whole gang just begging Corey to not get worked up about me. The gang are just tired of Corey's antics so much, and that, for me, that was amusing. But apart from that, it's such a nothing plot point. Clear, they were running out of ideas by season 7. But anyway, what they're doing here, any episode with Alan and one of the boys is always so interesting, even if they don't always particularly stick the landing. But it's so hard to take this one seriously. With who Eric has become based off this season, yeah, Eric doesn't have a future. However, I love how this episode brings us back to Prime Boy Meets World, with references to Weatherman. We turn to Alan's store for the first time in God knows how long. The whole thing just feels very season 4. And in a good way. And the final scene is so great. Overall, the episode way out of place. But as a standalone episode, it does work really well. 8 out of 10. 74th now, and I've gone for the season 6, episode 14, Getting Hitched. After the more superior will have a good time then, Jack and Sean have to go down to clear out Chet's trailer, only for Sean to find out Jack's stepdad paid for Sean to get into college. Meanwhile, Corey and Topanga realise they must live together, only have little success. Also, Jack and Rachel get together. Okay, a lot's going on here. Let's start with Jack and Sean, and it brings up my big issue with their dynamic, and that is, it's all just class difference. Everything Jack does, Sean will relate back to money, and it feels so overdone by now. And I get Sean's at a low point, it's not fair how he treats Jack. Jack's patient and desperation, he's really trying, and I'm glad Sean eventually does see that. But I really think he shouldn't get so worked up and should be grateful Jack stepdad gave him this opportunity. But I do appreciate that they tackle grief respectively and also dig them how. I also like how they show how much on another level living together is in the B storyline, although it is a bit cringy at times. And how the little things can just bring out the most serious of arguments. I'm glad they tackle this, but let's get to Jack and Rachel. My god, I hate how it happened. When Rachel blatantly takes advantage of Jack in a time where he's emotionally collapsing. This is the wrong time, Rachel. I just feel disgusted even talking about it. And this ruins their whole relationship for me, and I can't buy into it, even in other episodes. But you've got to feel for Eric walking in after being given false ideas. And I feel like Rachel definitely should have sat the two boys down and kind of handled this so much better. Overall, 73rd now, and it's iconic one. Season 7, episode 8, The Honeymooners. A simple yet effective episode when Topanga and Corey go on their honeymoon, and they unrealistically don't want to leave the island of complete luxury and paradise, only for them to realise how much they miss everyone. This episode is bonkers. It starts with the couple getting dragged out of bed by the police in the aftermath of the wedding episode. We have Eric hiding on the honeymoon, and honestly I have no words for Eric's antics. This episode is fun, and I like the resolution. It's nothing to write home about, but I enjoy it. 8 out of 10. Coming in 70 seconds, the episode that definitely wears the tagline are called Corey and Topanga are too young Trust me, we'll get to that with Season 6, Episode 8, You're Married, You're Dead. After Corey's not invited to a poker game with the boys due to being married, a rebellious Corey goes to a strip club only to lose his ring. I really appreciate the show tackling the idea of settling down on the opportunities that are lost and enforces even more that these two should enjoy their 20s and are too young. And I love how Topanga understands the importance of nights with the boys, only for her to get upset when he goes too far. The episode does a great job of making the ring into a metaphor of the commitment, and you can see why it hurts Topanga. However, where this episode fails me is this gang, for me, have no redeeming qualities. And I can't see why they'd be appealing to Corey. I can excuse Sean a little bit as he's suspect hanging out with the wrong people, but this gang are pathetic, and Topanga says a great line about this B-Tech Hardy kind of gang. Don't you realise that the people you're desperate to be liked by would pray to have what you have? The resolution is very sweet. There's also a B-plot line with Eric and Jack being worried about what Rachel would think about going to the strip club, only for her to be there. The whole thing's just tedious and really adds nothing. And of course the girls on one note. But who's shot there? 71st now, and it's an iconic one. I'm excited for this. It's Season 4, Episode 12, An Affair to Forget. When Sean dates Jennifer, a bitchy girl who forbids him from seeing Corey, it's the first episode to really emphasise the Sean and Corey intimacy. And when it's mostly played for laughs, it is a rarity for a show this time to show two male characters so intimate and important to each other's lives. And for me, this is one of the show's biggest strengths. I actually don't mind Jennifer's. She's intentionally supposed to be the worst and blatantly only gets back with Sean to piss off Corey. She works as an iconic villain, and besides Angela, there's no argument that she's Sean's most iconic partner. And are we just going to ignore that this woman marries Stuart Minkus? Now that's the spin-off I need to see. But for me, the best access of this episode is Topanga's involvement, and she states the importance of having a best friend, and that she knew she had to accept Sean when coming into Corey's life. And in this episode, she's the hero and says a great quote: "If she doesn't respect your best friend, she doesn't respect you." The comedy is also just great in this one. The constant hijinks of Sean trying to secretly communicate with Corey is just hilarious and honestly kind of cute. The B-plot is also decent, where in a classic get-rich scheme, Eric puts on a play of his life, which is nothing special, but the payoff is so nice, with a great quote from Feeney: "In the play of your life, your great scenes come ahead of you." Overall, an iconic episode with a great mix of humour and a serious undertones. 8 out of 10. 70th now with the Season 5 opener, Episode 1, Brothers. An episode that does something that the best episodes do in Boy Meets World, and that's having both storylines connect, have an underlying theme. In this one, Sean's half-brother Jack returns to town, with Jack wanting nothing to do with him completely. Meanwhile, Alan must let Eric go. Now, usually I'd call it a lazy plotline to bring a long-lost sibling into a sitcom. However, considering everything we know about Chet, this is so plausible and makes sense. You understand both sides here, and I feel so much empathy for Jack. He's so innocent and so desperate to patch things up with a reluctant Sean, but you get Sean's pain. The dynamic is really effective here. Eric and Jack are just gold from minute one. I love how Sean learns through Alan. Best thing isn't the easiest, and Chet knows he doesn't have what it takes to be the father Sean so desperately needs. So you get how he does. I hate how quickly Chet kind of springs it onto Sean in a cold fashion. The Alan Elliot plotline is great and plays into Alan's fear of letting his kids growing up very effectively. This episode unfortunately includes a couple eye-rolling moments. The episode begins with a 2-minute dream sequence of boys' fantasy. And I've definitely illustrated a proper dream sequence throughout this ranking, so I won't go over it again, but you had 22 minutes, you wasted 2 minutes of it on this, really. The episode also contains a scene where Eric works out next to Topanga, and the whole thing is just uncomfortable, really. Eric is just, in general, is just really dropped in IQ this season, and is blatant. Sorry to end on a downer, but overall this is a solid and important episode, 8 out of 10. 69th now. It's the big one. It's Season 3, Episode 15, The Heart is a Lonely Hunter, where Sean gets his eye open to how girls see him and don't take him as a genuine boyfriend potential. This episode covered something I'm glad we tackled. I love how we see Sean, the once king of dating, so clueless. And this whole thing is Dana is really sweet, despite the fact that Dana is a typical nice girl. Their dynamic is great, and such a defined episode in Sean, and a stepping stone that is eventually paid off for Angela. I also love how the show calls Sean out on how poorly he's previously treated women, with Topanga dropping this bombshell. "You don't understand women, you don't know how we feel. You know how you think or how you feel. You see it as a dating object and nothing more. And before you can get past that, no one will ever take you seriously. Well, Sean desperately needed to hear this to grow. To me, this whole story is just really well done and a great progressive moment for the character of Sean Hunter. The B-plot also sets up story weather here, with Eric using his passion to land a TV job, which is great to set that up prior, as this is technically a two-parter, which we'll get to Stormy Weather way later. Overall, really important episode, 8 out of 10. 68th and another important episode, however, to be fair, most episodes left are. It's season 3, episode 2, The Double Lie. In a classic sitcom situation, Turner lies about being out of town for a wedding, only for it to be an excuse to hang out with a girl. Meanwhile, Sean, after being dissatisfied with the Matthews curfew, takes the girl to Turner's apartment. You can only imagine what happens next. As previously stated, I've always enjoyed Turner and Sean's dynamic, despite how underutilised it tends to actually be. And seeing the more human side of Turner, and that deep down his motives aren't too indifferent to that of Sean's. And seeing Turner's internal struggle is so interesting. I love how we see the struggle with this commitment, and so interesting. And I wish we got more of this, because I love what we're doing here. Although I'm not a big fan of how we get exactly to the conclusion, it's so great. Turner, to be honest, could have just made a smaller scale lie and got away with this way easier. But he's one of the most morally complex of the whole show. 8 out of 10 for me. 67th is another classic. Oh, it's hit after hit from now on. With season 3, episode 14, The Grass is Always Greener. Corey and Topanga both feeling their relationship is going still. They both go to a party pretending to be someone else. This episode begins... but this episode does begin the old couple feel, which I'm personally not fond of. Communication could have ended this episode in a matter of a second. The fact that they both pretend to be other people is so telling how they feel, but they both lack the maturity to speak up and how they're feeling, and the breakup scene is so well acted and just so heartbreaking. And all this said, what brings this one down to me is how ridiculous some of the stepping stones are. I mean, Corey falsely identified as Sean is still one of the most ridiculous plot lines yet, and we're almost 100 episodes in. But overall, it's flawed, but it's iconic. 8 out of 10. 66, and we're back with season 1 with Father Knows Lair. This is a great example of a morality tale. At a time of being extremely busy, Alan lets Corey stay up to see a baseball game, only for him to fail a test. This is a great episode. I love how Finney is actually proven wrong in the end. While the test is important, a memory like staying up with your dad never goes away. It's also great how the episode brings a sort of Adam Feeney dynamic. This is only present in season 1, but it works quite well, where they both have huge respect for each other, but have a contrast in opinions on certain things. Overall, really complex episode for season 1, 8 out of 10. 65th now, and it's a fun one. Season 2, episode 14, I'm Not a Crook. In what is a really clever episode, Corey, not known for his purpose, runs for class president, only to learn the issues for marketing and lies. I love how this show points out the blatant unreachable vows that are still very much present in today's politics. And I find it amusing how this episode is just more relevant today than it was. With how many promises we've been promised by prime ministers in recent years, just for them to not go on with, you know, whether it's David Cameron, Theresa May, Boris Johnson, Liz Truss, Richie Sunak, like... It's just so, I find this one so, and even if it's American politics, it's so how it focuses on people turning back on the people who put them in the position. And Sean literally is the man who gave him his whole campaign. And this episode is just so funny. I love the moment where Sean reveals himself as a candidate, and Feeney's like, finally, a seriously minded student appalled at the campaign so far. And then Sean Hunter comes and he's like, I quit. It's so great. We also get a good Turner Feeney dynamic, as Turner gives the boys a lot more of the chance and is more open-minded in comparison to Feeney's having none of it. 64th now, and I'm surprised this one got here, but it's season 1, episode 16, Model Family. With the gang given an assignment to act as a family, meanwhile Eric takes a job at the mall, which is highly disapproved of by his parents. This is another episode where the stories cohesively linked, as Corey sees the perfect family is not possible, and that while there is argument that they care for each other is what is truly important. This is the first episode that gives us a non-girl centric plot for Eric, and we start to get a sense of who this guy is. And it also brings in Jason, who has an instant chemistry with Eric. Believe it or not, Jason Marsden and Will Friedle were actually friends behind the scenes, so I think that definitely helped contribute. And well, the plot is a classic male character gets in over his head and is manipulated and blinded by a woman to take an unappealing job. And while the tonal shift is odd, Adam putting down his authority and Eric gives us a taste of what their relationship will be like in future episodes. This episode is a catalyst for kind of the future as well. And we'll see this even better in episodes like Security Guard or Stormy Weather. Also, a couple of lines to address. Firstly, the show had a chance to make a cheap dig at homosexuality with this joke, and I'm glad they didn't. Someone, I think it's Eric, goes, "Why don't you just marry Sean?" And then Corey goes, "Because our kids would look like horses." Also, we get probably my favourite meta joke in the whole show with this line. It must be easy to sound good when you have the best writers in Hollywood, right? And everything you say. I wouldn't know. George Feeney. Brilliant. Overall, an important episode. 8 out of 10. 63rd now, and this is definitely one that had no right being this good. Season 3, Episode 6, This Little Pig. Sean gets a pig, leaving Corey in the middle of a Sean Topanga argument. One on the surface, a ridiculous concept to get behind, but what this pig signifies someone for the very lonely and often isolated in the world, Sean. And the metaphor is beautiful. Look, while I get Topanga's insensitive, she's so annoying here. And out of line. The pig isn't harming anyone. She should really keep her nose out. And I'm glad she changes her mind. And she, they do give her the redemption, which is good. But I like how Topanga and Sean's friendship is really defined in this episode. And now they've really become this legendary trio. I also love how Turner comes in and condones the pig and really comes in as the hero. I guess I'll touch on the B plot where Eric and Feeney go to the opera. Apart from it being a great episode for Eric and Feeney's dynamic, and this hilarious burn from Feeney, "I couldn't get you into a Yale sweatshirt," it's nothing, really. So overall, an episode way better than it has any right to be. 8 out of 10. 62nd now with another surprise. Season 3, Episode 14, New Friends and Old. The episode focuses on Frankie and the judgment people make on him. Meanwhile, we get Turner's backstory. This episode demonstrates why the side characters are just as strong as their lead, which is something I really love about Boyne's World. I feel like the side characters are always just as memorable. It was great to dedicate to this as Frankie, as Corey and Sean take advantage of his side. And we see the inside that Frankie's just this gentle giant who wants friends. And him getting that moment with Corey and Sean is great. This episode also shows the death of Joey the Rat, as he apparently burned Sean and Corey clothes and then put them in a dress. I mean, you had that coming, mate. Let's be honest. What else were you expecting after that? But you gotta love it when an episode starts off with an implied transphobic joke. I love seeing Turner's backstories where it shows how much we see from him. That he actually came from this rich background, but he gave it all up to come and become a teacher, and really helps you to see why he connects to Sean so much. But overall, it's a good character study, and I'm glad we did it. It's not the most impactful episode, but it deserves credit. 8 out of 10. 61st, though, of a hard one to place, is Season 7, Episode 22, A Brave World Part 1. The gang must disband as Corey finally convinces Topanga to go to New York. You gotta love how the show had to wreck on the Yale decision. But it actually works really well. Topanga asking Corey to marry her to stay in her home environment with fear of the unknown makes a lot more sense to me. And Corey, who's been so scared of change, convincing Topanga after his final feeling lesson that he must go is so thematic and closes his arc. But once he actually is mature, well done, Corey. As he's really met with the world. For most of this episode is a montage, including scenes from Season 7, which I always found a bit unnecessary. It's also really sad. The trajectory of Sean is heartbreaking. Everyone he's cared for is gone. He has nowhere to go. To Matthew, it's quite the tragic end for the show's most developed character. I also love how Feeney's plan from I Dream of Feeney has finally grown and sprouted in what is such a clever callback and thematic moment. And I mean, for a show that is so bad with continuity, to do something like that was incredible. Eric's ending also makes sense for him wanting a fresh start is in line. So overall, well, the weaker of the final 2 episodes, it's a solid episode in its own right. 8 out of 10. 60th now with I Love Donna Cara. Breaking up with Angela, Sean finds a purse and falls in love with the person who owns it. However, he's too scared to go find her with a fear of getting hurt. I love how we play with Sean's deep fear of rejection and his inability to make a commitment, as we play on the classic, your fantasy of someone being better than the actual reality. And I loved it. And we get a great quote from Sean. I've seen the pain on my father's face every time a woman walks out on him because he's not good enough. And we really get that idea of Sean not wanting to be his father, which we see even more in Season 6. And as much as I like this, I find the issue with the contents of Angela Purse and how little it does represent her culturally. Now this brings me a big aspect of the show, the fact that Angela's race is never brought up past the odd throwaway joke, and this well was on Trina's request. I'm very indifferent on this, as I can see both arguments. However, putting something culturally relevant would have been a nice gesture. That final shot with the subversion is so heartbreaking for Sean and really hits you. I might as well address the B plot, where Eric sees an imaginary Mr. Feeney, which is played for laughs, but does have some deep subtext, as it shows how impactful Feeney really is on Eric's side. So overall, good setup with one slight fall. 59th out, and we're back in the mix of the Lauren arc with Season 5, Episode 16, Torn Between Two Lovers. After finding Lauren's letter, a heartbroken Topanga tells Corey to see Lauren, only for him to proceed to do this and realise he can't live with Topanga. Corey's audacity is back, boys! And I'm so glad Topanga is given her stage here. Corey should have turned down Lauren immediately, the moment she arrives, but he doesn't. He shouldn't have had to test his feeling, as Topanga rightfully verified. And I'll say my thoughts on Corey and Topanga as a duo for Heartbreak Corey, but what I will say is they're a lot more cute and less toxic than Corey and Topanga. And the scenes feel so natural, and they have fun. So it rarely seen with Corey and Topanga. Corey needed to date Lauren here, moving forward in the show. He had his chance to send her away, but he commits, and he can't go back to Topanga now. And I'm so glad that Topanga gets that moment to absolutely slaughter Corey with this quote. I never needed to test my feelings for you. I moved away from my parents to be with you. I forgive you for lying, for kissing her, for the letter, but the fact that you needed to test how you felt for me. Topanga is spot. And I love how Sean is desperate to get the couple together, and that really comes to light in future episodes. Most notably, and then there was Sean. Overall, Corey's frustrates me, but a great episode filled with great drama and stakes. 58th now, we've officially covered 100 episodes, but we're here with Season 6, Episode 2, Her Answer. After the rushed elope, reality hits Topanga and she can't say I do. This episode plays with the interesting dynamic of Amy and Topanga. Well, Amy does like Topanga, however she does think deep down she has some issues with the marriage. And her concerns are definitely valid, and I agree with them. But her saying, why couldn't you have just gone to Yale, is the wrong move and out of line, and makes Amy in a rare moment really unlikable. And I hate how Amy views are twisted by Alan, from her feeling they're too young, to her feelings of jealousy, of Topanga becoming a woman in Corey's life. It's so frustrating. Even if the payoff is good. And Corey's audacity can come out in this one, as how he speaks to Topanga in a place of vulnerability is just wrong. And the whole thing just felt like an excuse for Corey to propose again. I mean, it's such a 90s thing to have this whole progressive thing of Topanga proposing just to make Corey propose in the end. Jack, Rachel and Eric stuff is annoying, but I'll talk about that more when I get to his answer. Overall, 8 out of 10. I have my gripes. Has some great moments, especially Eric mocking Amy at the end. That was a personal highlight. Anyway, moving on. 57th now, and it's a proper deep one with Season 7, Episode 12, Family Trees. After Sean gets a letter from Vernon revealing she's not his real mother, Sean is determined to find his only remaining family, only to find out his mum was a stripper. Well, originally watching the show, I found this plot like sort of an unnecessary and taken away from the development we've had. However, this serves as a great closure to Sean's family arc, as Sean finally forgives a ghost Jet for somewhat trying and not running away. It's such a great moment, as Sean wants to give the hunters a good name again, so he can't let Alan adopt him. I love how the gang knew at this point that Sean's bound to do something, and they're really playing into the tropes, and I feel the thematicness of Sean's last running away. Corey's audacity, of course, couldn't escape this one, as he's extremely controlling and won't let Sean read the bloody letter. Corey just needs to stop sometimes. Just calm down, dude. The B plotline in this one involved throwing a party for Alan, Eric being used as a bait, which is hilarious. Overall, not one of my favourites, but on rewatch I saw how important this was in closing Sean's family's arc. 8 out of 10. 56 now with Season 3, Episode 3. What I meant to say. When Corey tells Topanga he loves her, it's too much and she leaves out of fear, only for Topanga to learn what love really means. This is a truly classic episode and delivers a classic Michael Jackson moment. I love the subtlety in Danielle's acting. You understand how she feels about words. This episode really plays on the innocence and naivety the couple both still and have. But they're extremely believable and the chemistry is so good. And there's almost this magic to the couple that is severely lacking in the later seasons, unfortunately. This episode also brings in Eli, who actually makes a good impact in his arrival. The character has a lot of potential that was untapped, unfortunately. And the stories do link through Eli's advice to Corey. But I do have to mention the unfortunately outdatedness of Corey breaking into a teenage girl's window. Well, it's an iconic, aesthetic. I don't think that would fly today. So yeah, overall, it doesn't ruin the episode like I've stated at the beginning, but I thought I need to make one of probably my top 3 Corey and Topanga focus episodes. 8.5 out of 10. 55th now of our second Christmas episode. Season 5, episode 11, A Very Topanga Christmas. Maybe I've gone too high on this one, but I'm a sucker for a good Christmas episode. When Topanga stays at the Matthews for Christmas, Corey and Topanga realise they have very different Christmas traditions, only to create a scare for the future. Meanwhile, Jack and Sean try to find a Christmas tradition. This episode shows a really rare instance when I'm Team Corey, and trust me, that comes up rarely. Topanga is so obnoxious and should be grateful for the Matthews letting her stay. I know she means well, but she's so selfish. She made them drive 6 hours for a Christmas tree, for God's sake. And it's overall just really controlling out of character. However, the discussion of how Christmas traditions are interpreted and compromised, I find so interesting. And the conclusion of making that own tradition is just beautiful. The B plot is also really strong. We don't get many Jack and Sean plot lines. I mean, I think the show forgets their brothers every other episode, but this one's great. And they genuinely find something to bond over. And it's such a progressive. It brings in an obligatory Feeney Christmas Carol 10. However, it also includes a 4-minute dream sequence episode where Topanga kisses Jack and Corey's fat shame, so yeah, they cancel each other out. Overall, not a perfect episode, but I really love it. 8.5 out of 10. 54th now is a great one. It's season 1, episode 8, Teacher's Bet. In a plotline so relevant today, Corey teaches a lesson on discrimination and prejudice after a bet with feeling that he can make more students pass the test. This episode just does such a great job of opening Corey's eyes to the discrimination around him. And him seeing this in practice through Eric's date is so brilliant. This episode is a truly special episode and tackles things other sitcoms just wouldn't go into. And that final scene is so good as we see Corey's passion is so evident. However, my only issue here is I don't like how Linda was brought in solely as a plot device for race, as a racism victim, and not a character in her own right. It would have been a lot more impactful for me if she was in an episode or 2 prior. This episode also has Topanga states she's pro-public nudity, but thought that was worth noting. Overall, a classic episode that really shows Boy Meets World at its best, and it could even crack the top 50. Just you wait for what we have coming up. Solid episode, 8.5 out of 10. 53rd now, we're back to season 2 with By Hook or By Crook. When Corey is ill, Eric takes centre stage as he gets a tutor who's feeding him the answer. Well, this episode is definitely messy in parts. The conclusion is just so strong. This episode tackles on Eric's academics, something that's quite prominent in the middle season that I haven't really got to yet, and I think that's a sign of how strong these episodes are. And this episode shows the notion that Eric has the skill, but the laziness and his own stubbornness constantly holds him back. But when primarily motivated, he can flourish. And that's completely on the show here, as Eric won't let this girl use him. And it really hit me emotionally out of nowhere. It's so effective. And this is also a great catalyst for Eric and Feeney's dynamic. The second best relationship for me in the whole show behind Corey and Sean. The people also includes Topanga looking after Corey, which is sweet, and Sean Uncle fixing Turner's bike, which really helps to build that dynamic. So overall, an unfocused but strong episode. 8.5 out of 10. 52nd now, and it's an iconic one. Episode 20, season 1, episode 21, Boy Meets Girl. This just should have been the season 1 finale. When Sean starts showing interest in girls, Corey tries to keep up with him by asking out Topanga, realising he's not ready. This episode is the first instance of the battle between friends and girls. That's a central focus in the next season, and plays into the pilot's themes with Corey losing people to girls. I love Amy's wisdom here. I love how she calls out Corey's naivety. And it is amusing that this episode tackles puberty superior than the actual puberty-centric episode. But what will be remembered in this episode is the incredible Corey and Topanga moment with the sock game. It's just, I can't. It's just so cute. This is when the couple were in their prime. They're so cute, and the contrast and personality makes the dynamic even more special overall. This is a classic, but in season 1, but because it is season 1, it does somewhat lack the emotional weight. And some of the girl scenes are unnecessarily awkward in this one, but great episode, 8.5 out of 10. First, now with the season 4 opener, You Can Go Home Again. When Eric goes to this suburban town, Eric is reluctant to go home, feeling he has nothing at home. He attempts to stay. Meanwhile, the reality hits Alan that he's been a grocer for 20 years. This is a great episode where the two stories really mirror. And this for me is one of the most well written in the entire show. As the season opener is so effective to set Alan and Eric's arcs up, while also balancing great humour like the famous That Farmhouse there. I love how Eric sees himself as a failure, and that conversation between Eric and Alan is so effective as Alan passes his wisdom on to Eric based off his own prior mistakes, pushing Eric forward to achieve more than him. It's as Alan really discovers his purpose as a father, and it's a Michael Jacobs magic. The show's always great with demonstrating other classes and work. This episode also has a moment where Sean's in a bath towel and says he's naked, and then the audience woos. What wasn't massive on that one. Overall, it's a really good episode. It's not higher up because when I dig how clever the writing is, it does fail to resonate with me, and I struggle to pinpoint why that is, being honest. Not very good assessment, is it, Earth? But yeah, overall great episode, 8.5 out of 10. We've officially made it into the top 50 with Season 7, Episode 3, Angela's Men. This episode frustrates me. I want to put it higher, but a couple of things really hold it back. When Angela's father returns to town to recruit students, he helps Angela and Sean get back together. I love getting to know Angela, and hearing she had a similar upbringing to Sean is just heartbreaking and makes the connection so much stronger. I also love how the show illustrates how important Sergeant Moore is to Angela, due to her excitement. Seeing Angela read right through Sean's plan and expressing her father is very in line with her character, and the moment they get back together is just beautiful and so iconic. However, this episode is just a retcon, as it goes from Sean not being ready to Angela fearing she'll hurt him, which, well, I think makes sense. It's frustrating, and it irritates me because it makes Angela such a stronger character, but better foresight could have saved this episode. I wish they would have set this up prior. Few moments I have to address. Firstly, Feeney raises his hand to the question, are you not happy with how your life's going? Like, you just got married, mate. Thought that was worth noting. Also, Eric's shot, I just can't. This is clearly the moment he's lost it, as Eric tries to sneak attack Topanga. Well, entertaining, it's just sad what they've done to this character. It does great things, but has a glaring issue in continuity that just annoys me. 8.5 out of 10. 49th now of another case of Corey's audacity. Honestly, if I had £1 for every time this tagline came up, I'd be richer than Bill Gates. But anyway, we have Season 6, Episode 4, Friendly Persuasion. When Sean breaks up with Angela to see other people, Corey realises he lacked friendship with Angela. Meanwhile, Feeney becomes a college professor. I love how this show gave Corey and Angela this episode and actually built out the smaller threads in the friend group. Something other shows just wouldn't do. And although Corey's obsessive, Angela is one of the few characters in the show that isn't afraid to put him in his place. I love that. And I think them having this little secret is great. I think the episode is so effective in what it does. I also like how the breakup isn't over dramatised and is realistic to what happens in actual college relationships. Only to reveal Angela's deep emotion is great. The B storyline does hold some substance, as Feeney takes a college class as a student only to realise you can't take the teaching from the Feeney, and it's really clever. As Feeney take on background doesn't define a man out of character as wrong. You can't take the Feeney from the Feeney. It's such a clever metaphor overall. Corey was bad as always, but is it to be expected? It's an all-round pretty great episode. 8.5 out of 10. 48th now with another finale with Season 6, Episode 22, State of the Union. As Corey and Topanga come closer to finalising their wedding day, is put on hold as Topanga's parents announce a divorce, leaving Topanga absolutely heartbroken. Meanwhile, Feeney and the Dean get married. This episode works well as a thematic final, tying up a lot of the themes of the season of Season 6. That's in a literal case of Feeney, but we see Eric and Jack realise they cared more about the competition than the girl, leaving Rachel rightfully hurt and really illustrating my problem with the storyline. We see an isolated Eric leave for a road trip in what is played for laugh but really sums up the tragedy of this character, and at this point nothing's going for him. I love how he has this moment with the equally tragic Sean, and while the scene is awkward and the show calls out the lack of scenes they've actually had together, it's a great moment, and for Topanga, well, although I hate what this episode leads to, it's a very well done and you get the sense something could go off with the duo. from the beginning through subtlety, and Topanga's disbelief and denial is absolutely heartbreaking. And the wedding is great. Seeing Feeny have someone is lovely, and I love this quote by the Dean. My only sadness is I found you so late in life that we spent more days apart than we were together. Overall, just a really effective episode of what he's trying to do, but not the most iconic. 8.5 out of 10. 46 now, and bloody hell, we've got a meaty one. I tell you, every episode going forward is an absolute classic. But here we have Season 4, Episode 4, Fishing for Werner. When Werner is spotted, Chet and Sean send Corey as a messenger, only to be refused and returned. Only to refuse to return until she knows Chet wants to be the father Sean desperately needs. Meanwhile, Brenda, the lunch lady, passes away for Corey to realise the lack of respect minimal workers receive. This episode contains two great stories that they try to link, but the link doesn't particularly work. But anyway, let's start with the Hunters. We learn so much about the history of Sean. Learning to ride a bike in Toys R Us is such an interesting thing to include. And I love seeing Chet and Sean going over childhood memories, only for Sean to call Chet out. Werner leaving was a chance for Chet to step up to the mantle, but he didn't. He fled and delayed his return so much. I'm totally team Werner here. She left with no choice. And for someone who we later on ain't even Sean's birth mother, still wrote to him every single day. And you can totally see why she'd fall out of love with a person like Chet. But this whole thing is overall just heartbreaking, and Chet and Werner do unite and try to patch things, but we know it doesn't last long. My big gripes with this is I want more. However, after Turkey Day, Werner's gone and this plot is dropped. So as good as it is, it leaves a little impact. Anyway, the Brenda stuff is absolutely great. The reaction when she's dead is so sadly accurate, as the minimal silence only for people to carry on with what they're doing. I'm so glad they do this plot. So overall, it's not perfect, but so complex. 8.5 out of 10. 45th now. It's another big one. It's here. Season 4, Episode 16, A Long Walk to Pittsburgh, Part 1. This one frustrates me. As tragedy hits Topanga as her parents have to move across the country, leaving Corey broken. This episode is weird. Starting with a misinterpreted Sean and Topanga kiss, which we sort of all like to forget, and I have major issues with Corey and how he's so in disbelief that he can't bring himself to say goodbye, which sort of really ruined and took me out the whole episode for me. However, the big reveal is so well done and impactful, and works so well with the bombshell. Where it fails in comparison to Part 2, this is probably Boy Meets World and such a heartbreaking episode. 44th with another classic, it's Season 4, Episode 7, Truth and Consequence. After Sean and Corey are asked to make a news assignment, they catch a story on Aunt Janet above, Bud, with Eli not getting enough time to see if it's to see what it is before it's broadcasted to the entire school, with no choice but to fire Bud. This episode brings out a trend used a lot in this show, and that's Corey with a camera. Throughout the show, we get episodes of Corey flourishing as a filmmaker, with the consistent issue being him going too far or ruining a relationship. But they're all just such great episodes, which is why it hasn't really come up yet. This episode is a great morality tale, with there being no foregone conclusion by the end, and the person who gets the lesson in the end is Eli. Corey and Sean did everything they were told to do. They got an exciting story, and they shouldn't feel bad. Bud was really pushing it. However, at the same time, you feel that empathy for Bud once it's revealed where he goes. So I can excuse him. I love the face and all of the adults in the scene. With no words, there's just a mutual understanding, and it's so in character for Feeny to take Bud as an assistant at the end. Overall, what an episode. And it paints a world that isn't black and white. And I feel like each person can make their own interpretation. For me personally, I think Eli was in the wrong, not watching it beforehand. But I think you could very much likely see this one differently. Fascinating episode, 8.5 out of 10. 43rd now is an episode I'm still in disbelief is here. I can't believe I finessed this. It's Season 3, Episode 10, Train of Fools, where the gang get trapped on a train on New Year's Eve. This episode had no right being above the past 150 probably, but I don't care. It's just so entertaining. There's so much bonkers here. You have Eric dating a celebrity only to use her for the novelty and stardom, for the notoriety and stardom, and not for love, leaving Corey to ruin it. You have the party kid, and that apparently no one knows what party mean. Like, he's not exactly. You have Sean just having a blast everywhere with twins and a pregnant woman. But there's still even some heart here through Eric and Corey's reminiscing over past New Year's. However, what brings this one down and doesn't probably put it even higher is the atrocious Turner and Eli's story, where in season 3 they try to do a bit more with the adults, and I think at times it really worked, especially when you have kind of the Feeney Turner stuff, and even when you have kind of the groups doing stuff. I like the episode with the poker game, but this just did not work, where you had three of Jonathan's exes coming back on New Year's just to mock him, where with Eli laughing along as well, they don't show Eli as a potential for anything. It had no right to be on this show, and it just did not work. But overall, it's way too high, but I love this episode. It's just so much bonkers, and I watch it every single year. Forcey's second now, back to actual great episodes with Season 5, Episode 2, Boy Meets Real World. Yep, Corey with a camera is back. In this one, Corey has tackled to make a documentary of Sean, Eric and Jack living together in the apartment, only for everything to come out and for Corey to learn that real world genuineness is better than a documentary. I love how this one really helps to deflate the unfinished tension between Jack and Sean, and even though I'm not usually a fan of every Jack and Sean plot being money related, I'll excuse this one as it's the first time it comes on and leads to a really good payoff as the brothers clear things out and Jack explains that he never received Sean's letter in a really beautiful moment. And overall, the real world thing is a great and creative way of kind of framing the story. I like when the show gets creative like that. Well, also, it adds another element to Corey with having to step in a similar vein to Quiz Show. It's not tried to call out TV's fakeness with the overdose of retakes, and Corey plays a very noncy producer extremely effectively. This episode also introduces Angela as a background character, which I really appreciate. It's nice to establish her as a classmate kind of beforehand. The episode also foreshadows Feeney moving, so, you know, you could tell they did have some plans going into this season. The B plot does pull this one down, unfortunately, as Morgan brings a replacement Eric as she learns you can't replace someone. And I truly despise this fake Eric and really failed to see his incentive. Like, it was just weird. It was just not very funny. So overall, I tell you, Corey with a camera episodes just really work. 8.5 out of 10. 41st now, we can finally discuss Season 6, Episode 1, His Answer. Following directly from the Season 5 cliffhanger, we see the aftermath to the marriage proposal, as Corey with some hesitance agrees, as every member of the cast minus Sean believes the couple are out of their mind completely, only for the couple to run off to privately alone. This episode is such a good case study of why the couple are too young. They treat marriage as if it's some petty rebellious behaviour, like a child doing something because you were told no, and they never want to stop to understand the implications. The great retaliation concerns being put on the table, and that says it all. I love Angela believing it ridiculous, and that it's very in line with her. She always tends to take the grounded, nuanced viewpoint. Feeney's viewpoint is that of independence. They're adults now. Even if you disagree with them, you have to accept it. Which makes sense. I mean, where the parents are almost in disbelief, with Alan wanting to steer Corey away from the same mistake he made. Also playing on the idea of him not to let his children go, it's a consistent theme. As for Amy, she's very much in the too young camp, and as for Sean, well, he needs them together. So I think we can disregard that. And Eric, well, he tries to be the voice of reason to little effect. But I love how the show fleshes out the faults of everyone. However, I don't like how the reactions are more important than the actual couple themselves, which just shows how rushed the whole thing is. Meanwhile, we have Rachel introduced, and from day one she's simply a sex symbol thrown into the Deflategate entrance. Prove me wrong. Only to become a prize we want. I hate how the boys just treat her literally. They literally talking about sexually doing stuff, so right behind her. Fortunately, Rachel does get better and reach an episode, but her start was not good. I have my gripes, but this is a well-written, complex episode. 8.5 out of 10. Right, we're breaking into the top 40 now with Season 7, Episode 14, The War. This is iconic. After stealing Rachel's driving spot, a prank war breaks out, with the friend group deciding that OG theme is the new through, with the pranks escalating until Corey and Sean cross the line. Although I've argued they're both as bad as each other. This episode is definitely a standout of the last season and is so iconic, although suspension of disbelief is pushed at parts. I mean, I love Eric as just this voice of reason, and this is actually a really hard episode to discuss without speaking about part two. But what I will say is this episode really demonstrates how little Rachel is valued and how little she actually adds to the team. And in a moment of Corey's audacity, which is Bat Boys, he says a quote that says so much of how both the writers, ironically, and Corey see Rachel. Why are you taking Rachel's side? You've known us your whole life. You've known Rachel for what, a few years? However, I must argue that setting a literal line of someone is just as bad as revealing a photo. And while Rachel overreacts, it's not the photo. At least, not how I read it. It's the betrayal and the lack of communication that hurts her. Overall, it's an iconic episode, only enlightened by its second half, which we'll get to soon. Overall, 8.5 out of 10. 39th now, and it's another Christmas episode with Season 6, Episode 11, Santa's Little Helpers. And wouldn't you know, Corey's audacity is back. As Christmas comes, Topanga and Corey try to force Angela and Sean together, with little subtlety. Meanwhile, Eric takes a job as Santa at the local store, only to spend hundreds on unfortunate children. With one of the kids, Tommy, asking for parents. Let's start with Angela and Sean. Well, I like the whole Angela Corey secret and Topanga Sean secret looming over, leading eventually to the couple having no choice but to address where they're at. But what I don't like is Corey. While male meaning, which I feel like is another tagline for Corey, he just has no understanding of social boundaries, and sometimes I'm just left screaming for him to have a day off. And Topanga says a quote that very much demonstrates, your intentions are good, but just don't push too hard. But overall, I like the conclusion. Andrew and Sean come that, and Sean doesn't know if he's ready, and Andrew won't wait around for him. And I love that Andrew is rightfully given that moment. She never chose to break up, and it broke her. And for now is a prime opportunity for Sean to not know what he wants. I'm glad she stands her ground, even if it's disregarded in the next season. Anyway, the Eric stuff is just as good. Eric becomes the Mr. Beast of the 90s, while he's a bit obsessive with it. We see how good Eric with his children, and his rapport with Tommy is beautiful. This scene contains one of the most beautiful of the whole series, as Eric pleads to God on why he brought Tommy to him in a rare moment. God's relationship with God is weird, as he isn't a consistently mentioned. They sort of randomly throw him in whenever they want to. However, I tend to find that really effective, because when he is mentioned, you know the characters are desperate. And here's Eric's sensitivity really comes out, and him bringing Tommy to the Matthews is a beautiful and sets up an arc that lasts over a good few episodes as well. Overall, I do have my issues, but Eric's story is so strong that it brings it an 8.5 out of 10. 38th now, and we're into the 9 out of 10s and above. With Season 3, Episode 20, I Never Sang for My Legal Guardian. Also known as the episode that killed Jonathan Turner. Let me explain. I know he's in Season 4, but he might as well not be. Anyway, in this one, Turner attempts to adopt Sean, something he should have done months ago, which annoys a reluctant Sean, who wants to find his father. This episode does an incredible job of just humanising Turner, and his conversation with Elo shows he's just as scared to make this permanent as Sean is, which is something I always enjoy. As for Sean, we see him just begging for a place as permanent. He's never had a permanent place. We see how important Chet is to him, which is something they do a lot with Sean quoting Chet a lot. We see that Sean needs that father in his life, and it's worth noting that Chet accidentally stumbles upon Sean with no plan to stay. And the thing is, as terrible as a parent as Chet is, the actor just brings so much charm. He's so infuriatingly charismatic. I wrote that down when I was watching it. And the final heart-to-heart is great, and the somber goodbye to Turner is great. And I've got to give a shout out to Ryder for his acting when Chet offers him a hug. The mix of overjoy and confusion and shock is amazing. The episode B plotline is also great, with a classic Feeney trick, making Eric tutor a student only for it to up his own grave. That's just classic Feeney and really well executed. So overall, a great episode all around. Great episode for Sean and Turner, and sets up Season 4 nicely. 9 out of 10. 37th now, and it's a big one. Season 1, Episode 17, The Fugitive. After Sean blows up a mailbox to hide, he hides at the Matthews to hide from his parents. This is the episode that made Sean Hunter a character. Someone who previously could have been a blank slate becomes the show's best character here, and really to find the crime side of him and how he's always saved from that because of the great people steering him in the right directions. This episode has no filler B-plot, and they really cut right to the chase. They use their 22 minutes well. However, I do have some issues that drop it down, unfortunately, because you'd expect this one to be a bit higher. And that's Alan and Amy, and how they apparently know Sean's there and keep messing with him. Not only is it out of character, but it's a complete tone killer. And although this episode about Sean, most of it focuses on Corey and how he won't turn Sean in, which to make him go to his parents, which what a great scene. I wish we got more focus on Sean and his feelings over. But overall, it's an iconic and it's such an important episode, but maybe not as good as you remember. 9 out of 10. 36 now, and Corey with a camera is back with Season 3, Episode 19, The Pink Flamingo Kid. With what starts as a video made for Chet of the Hunter family, Corey tries to use it for a competition when he catches a crime on camera, only to later find out that the crime committer is Sean's half-brother. This is such a great episode, demonstrating the strength of Corey and Sean's friendship. The fact Sean didn't want to share it to protect him is just so beautiful. And the episode puts a huge emphasis on what family means with this great quote from Feeney: "You don't have to be blood to be family." Something I really took from the show. And it's just such a strong episode for their relationship, leading to the first of few fights. It's never personal and usually motivated by outside factors, and Eli makes a hilarious remark when he sees them fighting. "Did you guys know you were fighting each other?" Sorry again for the terrible impression. Eddie is also so effective as a villain. He upholds presence and demonstrates what Sean could become brilliantly. And I wish he had a longer stay and not completely forgotten after this episode. This is one of the many Sean siblings that we kind of pick up and forget about. Of course, Stacey is the other one. We'll get to her. But I tell you, Corey with a camera is always great. This is another 9 out of 10. 35th now, and it's another big one. Season 4, Episode 3, I Ain't Gonna Spray Letters No More. When Alan quits his job out consulting Amy eventually returning the favour. I love the message of this episode, that a risky job you enjoy to be put in higher regarding the simple, easy job. I love how this whole thing could have been avoided with communication, but then again, that's the case in most episodes. It's nothing new. It's great to give the parents a storyline. There's something I always respect the show for. The parents are not stupid or just set up for jokes or to be outsmarted by the kids. They're complex characters who make a substantial impact on the cast, and I think it's great to really hammer in Alan's purpose, that he has potential. And Feeney's involvement of not specifically telling them what to do but pointing them in the right direction is so Feeney and just brilliant. And in the end, Amy gets her moment to make that decision, and it's just so well done. What holds this one back is the B plot of Sean having to teach Corey how to be porn. I'm keeping that in. Of Sean having to teach Corey how to be poor. Just no, what are we doing here? It's not funny or entertaining. It just subtracts from the emotional weight of the A storyline. But overall, it's a great episode. 9 out of 10. 34th now, and we're back in Season 7 with Episode 6, It's Killing Us. As Corey and Topanga talk through the trials and tribulation that came with wedding planning, this episode is just so funny. Whether it's Morgan's hatred of the dress, Eric's mere incompetence as a best man leading to him setting 2 fires, the fact they made Feeney the band, or even the fact their guest list was apparently 270. Like, have we even seen 270 characters in the bloody show? This episode, as you could tell, is just bonkers, but does kind of accurately depict the chaos of wedding planning and prep. Like, as someone who's been a huge part of that, and like 2 years ago, I know this is extremely accurate. And it does kind of go over those classic wedding problems, like the best man struggle or the this cousin over this cousin question. And it's just overall such an entertaining episode that sets up that wedding episode so well. Overall, 9 out of 10. 33rd now. I can't believe an episode like this is all the way back in 33rd. But we've got to one of the most heartbreaking ones of all time. Season 6, Episode 17, Resurrection. Joshua, when Matthews is born, however, he's put into intensive care with fear he won't survive. This episode is so real, and I love how we see other families in the same predicament, and Alan's prayer to them at the end is just so beautiful. This episode, coming 3 after Chet's death, just illustrates how emotional Season 6 was, and this storyline is real, and something many have to face daily. I love Tommy's inclusion and how Eric explains Joshua's situation to Tommy. It's just great. And Betsy and Rusty nail it acting wise. However, why this episode doesn't break into the top 10 on paper it should be is no surprise! Corey's audacity coming to spoil the fun. As he overly relies on Topanga to shield him from the reality of the situation, and then complains she's not who she used to be, making the writers at least acknowledge how far Topanga's changed and how unrecognisable she's become from the quirky smart girl we saw in season 1. And while I like this little Topanga arc, it feels so out of place in an episode like this. However, Sean's return is so well done. I absolutely adore his speech to Joshua, solidifying how great the Matthews are. Overall, a beautiful episode, not getting a 10 out of 10 because of Corey's audacity. 9 out of 10. 32nd, well, that's a bit awkward. This episode title is unfortunately a product for the time, and I will refer to this as Season 5, Episode 13, The Inuit. But I won't give it any discredit because they couldn't have known at the time and they don't mean it in a bad way. In a classic Feeney lesson, each member is given a specific thing they must do. Sean must get Super Bowl tickets, Topanga must not butt in, and Corey must help them. Both. This episode really plays into the dynamic Feeney has with the kids. They think they know the lesson, but they get it wrong, and the whole thing's a metaphor for Sean's independence, and his whole life he's had Corey to keep him on his tracks, and he needs to stand alone for once. And the Inuit analogy does relate to Sean and the realistic boundaries we face in everyday life, and Sean having to uphold resilience. And as for Topanga, she must learn she can't control the boys forever, which is really effective. Overall, this episode is just really entertaining. The humour helps balance a great message. I mean, you are warm and we are cold. We are warm and you are cold. It gets looped in your head, doesn't it? But overall, such a unique and well written episode. 9 out of 10. 31st now, back in Season 2 with the best Corey of a camera episode. Season 2, Episode 8, Wake Up Little Corey. Oh, this is so great. Where do I even start? When Turner gives an assignment for Corey and Topanga to make a documentary on sex, it goes south when they accidentally fall asleep together, leading to rumours in Corey's extreme popularity. However, he never squashes or clears up the misconception, not realizing what he's done to Topanga's reputation. This episode works on so many levels. I love how they discuss sex, and Topanga says a great quote that illustrates how most boys see so. To boys, sex is just a goal. Something they're after, not really sure why. Sex is for a very special kind of love and a very special person. Topanga, we really see Corey's immaturity as he just can't say the word. And he's so in over his head in this conflict. He's so efficient. And Corey, who's been desperate for popularity, this is everything. And you can excuse his audacity in this one due to his naivety. This episode also gives us some quality Turner Feeney stuff, as Feeney is strongly against this and thinks the ancient methods are still just as effective. However, he is proven wrong in the end. The episode is also hilarious, and Alan says what has to be one of my top 5 favourite jokes of the whole show. Sex is like voting. You go behind a red curtain, do your thing every 4 years, rinse and repeat. It's just incredible. And the ending, wow. The feels, it's just pure Michael Jacobs, as Corey really redeems that. Overall, what an incredible episode, and the best part is there's 30 episodes better than it. 30th now, and keeping with Season 2 in the finale, Season 2, Episode 23, Home. After staying with the Matthews for 3 weeks, Sean's not adapting well and runs away and gets dragged home by the police, leading to Turner adopting him. This episode really illustrates the battle inside Sean's head. I'm glad the Matthews holds their frustration on Chet solely, and while finding it difficult with Sean, really try their best to this really solidified Turner and Sean as a relationship, and the scene with the police is so well acted by Anthony. And overall, we see that Sean is still young and impressionable, and just needs a place. And the conclusion is great. And of course we get some good Turner Feeney stuff with Feeney raising concerns over the new arrangement, only to be extremely well rebutted by Turner in a moment that I wasn't too happy with Feeney with. Overall, a great finale to a season, and sets up the next season cohesively. Overall, 9.5 out of 10. 29th now, and we're finally at the Lauren episode, Season 5, Episode 14, Heartbreak Corey. Do I even need to give the plot? You know what happened when Corey falls in a bus. I'm coming back to that. He's injured and can't go skiing, so spends the day with the worker Lauren, only for things to escalate. Okay, this whole big arc happened because Corey fell off a bus. I'm not downplaying this. Corey and Topanga's breakup, Lauren's meeting, Topanga applying for Yale, all of the drama, the mere existence of Vanilla Sean because he fell off a bus? Come on, writers. But anyway, this episode is so incredibly done. Lauren offers us a great alternative, and they make her likeable and human, unlike many other female characters. However, I will not defend Corey here. His subtlety lacks severely. Sean Clock's quick, and he let this happen. He isn't blunt, he doesn't communicate, and doesn't try to escape that kiss at all. Prove once again that that kiss meant something. Him lying to Topanga is the issue here. If he were blunt and known of it, would have happened. So Corey, no, he's not this innocent hero, and he gets what he deserved after this episode. For overall, this episode is so iconic and important. It's wrong to not be placed this high, but come on, he fell off a bus. Right, something a bit better than that. 28th now, we can finally conclude the war arc with season 7, episode 16, The Peace. Bracket 7 hard ways. This episode is post-Fallout. Eric brings the gang together to sort out their differences, fearing it could ruin their future. This episode really shows Eric's way with people and how he has this deep emotional understanding that's truly abnormal. I love him as this desperate and persistent voice of reason. Eric delivers the greatest quote in the show's history in this episode: "We lose one friend. Lose all friends. Lose yourself." I love how this show acknowledges how pointless Rachel is in the show and really helps to point out her importance in the end through the message. This is also a rare occasion where I exclude a dream sequence as it adds depth and gives us plays with squirrels, which is it's so bonkers and ridiculous, it kind of sort of works. The whole thing is unfortunately accurate, how the smallest things break friendships, something that I've definitely faced in my life. With so much establishment and effort put into them, something I can definitely relate to. And this quote Feeney says really demonstrates it. The stupid little fights can escalate into bigger fights and can shape your future. George Feeney. And the ending is just so good. Although Sean and Corey never apologise, which is still very telling, but overall it's so iconic, I just love it. 9.5 out of 10. 27th now, and it's another great one. Season 4, Episode 6, Janitor Dad. To pay the bills, Chet takes a job as a school janitor, only for Sean to be bullied. For this episode really demonstrates Verna and Chet trying. We see how desperate Verna is to be seen as a normal family. I love Chet in this episode. Everything from his motivation of the job being near Sean to his absolute feeling of accomplishment when he gets that check. It's great progression for the character. Shame it just doesn't tend to stick now. And Sean's arc is great in this one, and his change of heart is extremely earned. I love that Feeney knew he'd come to that conclusion prior. The show really puts great emphasis on minimal workers, and this is a great example of that. And I'm sorry, but for that the bullies that ridicule Sean, they need to get a life. Like, do you not have anything better to do? It's so weird that these guys just show up out of nowhere and just take the mick out of Sean's dad being a janitor. Like, get a life. They're just pathetic. Overall, it's a great stepping stone for, unfortunately, Chet in Chet fashion to go backwards. 9.5 out of 10. 27th now, we can finally complete another two-parter with Season 5, Episode 8, Chasing Angela. Desperate to be with Angela, Sean sets them out on a fancy date at an attempt to mimic Cora and Topanga, only to realise what they want what they have. I love how this episode really shows how clueless Sean is in dating, and really shows a different side of him. Their coming together takes time and really feels earned, and the dinner scene from top to bottom is just so effective. And it's one of those things you just have to witness, as we see them realise who they are, and it really gives such a thematic moment to finally give Sean a permanent partner. And Trina and Ryder so sell it, and make it natural and believable. The B story is, however, distracting as the cast play a trick on Eric and Jack, making them think they're responsible for Thanksgiving. Not only is this bad with continuity, as they reference last year's disaster with Feeney, which we all know they didn't celebrate with Feeney last year, but the motivation just doesn't make sense. And like, it's funny, yeah, but like, why would any family do that? It doesn't make sense. But overall, such a strong episode. 9.5 out of 10. 26 now, with an episode having no credit being this good, but just really works, is Season 4, Episode 15, Chicks Like Me. Realising they don't understand girls at all, Cora and Sean dress up as girls in an earnest attempt to understand them. Meanwhile, Lonnie is introduced. What I love about this episode is other sitcoms would have just had the note, Sean dresses up as a girl, and that was it. But this really tried to put a great message, as Sean gets his eye open to how men of the time really treated women and completely ignored the misses. I love the show but not tell here, as they visualise Sean's uncomfortableness, and his reaction is extremely warranted. As for Gary the Date, he's clearly an unlikable, irredeemable man, however he's sadly accurate to certain men in this world. And as for the trans aspect of it, they never say being trans is what is wrong, and clearly imply jokes. And we won't talk on the subject, which, far from ideal, but for the 90s isn't very awful. The jokes are not too offensive. This quote by Corey is great. I don't want you to take this the wrong way, but you're kind of a babe. But all in all, you can tell the writers were well intentioned here, and really were trying to tell a meaningful story and really expand the Sean character instead of just making it a joke. As for the B plot, Lonnie has to get the award for the show's most pointless character. Well done, Michael Jacobs, that's 2 characters more pointless than Morgan. She has one stick, Eric tries to come onto her, she acts manly, rinse and repeat. It's an even worse Rachel. But the only reason this is at the top, and this is the only reason it's kind of avoided the top 20. Overall, I have huge respect for how this episode was handled, and it really surprised me. 9.5 out of 10. 25th now, and it's an absolute classic. Season 2, Episode 1, Back to School. As the kids start high school in an attempt at popularity, Corey tries to befriend Harley Kiner, only for that to backfire. This episode is so defiant and really signifies a more mature tone excellently. And the whole thing feels so much better and so different from Season 1. Time is used so effectively in this episode. It introduces Turner, and from minute 1 you know everything about him. We introduce Harley, Joey and Frankie, who are just so iconic. And of course starts one of the show's best running jokes as Feeney is the principal. The pace is so good in this episode. It just feels like banging beat after banging beat. This is probably the funniest episode of the whole show, with the exception of one. Just does such a great job of setting up the season's themes of dating and identity, establishes the villain, and we get a classic Turner Feeney moment as Turner assigns an X-Men comment for the student to better understand the material. This episode is just golden on every level. 9.5 out of 10. 24th now, and back to season 4 with episode 19, Uncle Daddy. As Eric dates a girl with a child, Eric tries to step up to the mantle of the parent only to see he's not ready. Meanwhile, Corey loses his driving permit. I love when this show really opens the boys' eyes to their privileges, and I like how they don't paint Kelly as this damsel, and that when in a horrible situation, she is coping and happy to be a mother. However, they do give you reason to feel empathetic for her, which I think is really progressive. I also like how they write Ryan and really illustrate he's not a bad kid, but he's got that gaping hole of a father figure missing from him, and that's why he acts out in moments. Eric's whole story is just really mature, and how it ends is so realistic and well done. I like how the show shows how good Eric is with kids, but he's still young and needs time to grow himself. And the whole thing. However, because Eric is so full drama in this one, Sean needs to appear as the comic relief, and his childish energy toward the kid is so off-putting. And as for Corey's story, Corey's audacity is back when he doesn't fill the gas tank, gets the ban and tries to bend the rules. It's a pretty standard plot, but ties in nicely at the end. The two stories do tie in nicely at the end. Anyway, it's such a strong episode. Really close to perfection here. 9.5 out of 10. 23rd now with another Eric-centric episode with Season 6, Episode 18, Can I Cheer You? Heartbreak comes to Eric as a foster family across the country comes to adopt Tommy. As Eric must come to the reality that he can't adopt Tommy. This episode hits you where it really hurts. Eric promises and dedication to adopt him, only to come to his senses and have to not only say goodbye but break Tommy's heart is just the worst. And for Eric it feels like Tommy was all he had left, showcased in this quote. Everyone I know has someone they want to dedicate their life to. I finally have that, and you're discouraging it. Tommy's naivety and lack of awareness is just tragic, but Eric makes the right decision, and one of the few things I love Girl Meets World for, as problematic as that show was, is we see Eric did the best thing for Tommy, and as tough as it was for Eric, he did the right thing. The B plot's the only thing holding this back, as Corey, Sean and Topanga go to wedding ideas, only for the father of the bride to offer Corey $1 million to marry her. It's such a nonsensical and inconsequential plot to get behind. Overall, this episode broke me in a good way. 9.5 out of 10. 22nd now, and it's time for the final. Season 7, Episode 23, A Brave New World Part 2. Well, Season 7 was a complete mixed bag. It absolutely went out on a high and truly stick the landing where so many sitcoms fail. Looking at you, How I Met Your Mother. The final scene in this episode is absolutely everything, as even in the final moments, Feeney won't cross the line and break the professionalism, only to say the final quote of the whole show: "I love you all. Class dismissed." It's such a moment. Words will never do justice to illustrate the mere perfection of that moment. Sean's final words to Feeney of "You never gave up on me" always gets me, and shows how these characters made Sean as the great young man. And after every mistake him and Corey made, Feeney always stuck by and helped define their lives. Feeney's faith in Eric is so beautiful, and such a great testament to their relationship. I love the closure they give to Jack and Well Out of Place in the episode. Him giving up the money to chase his passion, while taking something from Chet, is such a great, and Corey's speech to Joshua is beautiful, and oddly meta, as Corey passes the torch. Overall, it works so well. And if it wasn't for so many, clips in it, it would get a 10 out of 10, but it's a 9.5. 21st now, the last Season 2 episode on the list. Season 2, Episode 22, Career Day. It's Career Day, and Alan feels bad for his lackluster job, only to see his strength as a parent as Sean's father Chet comes to town to tell Sean Werner has left with the home. This is another example of when the stories link. As Alan learns and feels importance through Chet, this episode so effectively introduces Chet. From minute one, you can easily get who he is, and they don't shy away from calling out his audacity, especially when he just off the cuff expects Matthew to take Sean on. However, why he works is because of the charisma the actor brings. I think his name's Blake, I believe, and the role, he's just got this likability and natural energy that makes him extremely difficult to hate. His rapport with Feeney is great, and I love how the Matthews confront him. The idea that Werner left with the home is somehow so tragic, but yet so hysterical at the same time. And I love Sean's reaction and how he acts fine on the surface and plays it down. This is a consistent theme that I've not mentioned with Sean, actually. How this episode B plot is alright, with pressure getting to Eric and Jason as SATs near, which works and helps foreshadow Eric's character in the next two seasons. With where this episode shines is Corey. After experience, Chet sees what an incredible father he's got and how proud of him. It's a proper Michael Jacobs moment. Overall, a great episode where Corey's at his absolute best, and it so brilliantly sets up season 3. 9.5 out of 10. We've officially hit the top 20, boys. We can now get to Eric during the middle season, with season 3, episode 16, Stormy Weather. When Eric drops out of college to pursue his TV job and gets to fill in as a weatherman, only to face the realities of the real world. This episode is so frustrating because the B plot is outright terrible, but the A plot is so strong. In a rare instance, I've decided to discard the B plot, and I don't care about your complaints, alright? It's my list. Turner's dating Dana's mum, it just doesn't exist now. It was such a terrible plotline and ruined Heart is a Lonely Hunter, but I won't let it distract from this A story, so we're erasing it from existence. While we're at it, we might as well erase Singled Out and Truth and Honesty as well. I love how this episode really shows Eric with aspirations and dreams, only to be heartbreakingly crushed. I love how every character knows Eric is making a mistake, but his naivety is so clear. However, you want to see Eric succeed, and his feelings of joy you don't want it unravelled, and you know it will. Feeney is great in this episode, as he knows Eric's mistakes and he's trying to protect him, but until he faces it, nothing can stop him. I love how the episode illustrates that Eric in the real world now, and that is so much harsher, and Eric is broken. I'm also big on any episode that points out the reality of the TV industry, and they do this quite a lot on the show. This episode also has a lot of underlying themes of growing up and rebellion, and this all happens on Eric's 18th birthday, which just adds to the tragedy. Overall, such a strong episode. If we ignore the B storyline, which we are, 9.5 out of 10. 19th now, and another Eric-centric episode with Season 4, Episode 20, Security Guard. Doing what he should have done a long time ago, when Alan fires Eric from his store, leading to him getting a job as a security guard and resenting his mother, only to get his eyes open for an immigrant having to go to college again. This episode really brings Eric and Alan's arc full circle, after Eric finally takes the SATs and passes in a moment that feels so earned, as Alan finally lets Eric go. I love how this episode paints Eric's laziness and Feeney's constant frustration with Eric. He has what it takes, he just doesn't do it. And we see that with the quote that Eric could get passing grades in his sleep. And I like how blunt and mature the adults act towards him. However, I find it odd that they heckle a security guard job, and it's very tenement of class, and that whole thing's a bit jarring. The bear thing's such a silly thing to get Eric the boot, especially considering the tone of the rest of the episode. I wish they wrote something better that Eric could screw up on. I get the bear thing's funny, but the scene between Eric and Alan is so strong that Alan finally is honest and really lets his son go. This is such a great closure to Eric's arc and feels so completely earned. 9.5 out of 10. The bear thing is the only thing not giving it a 10. 18th now, and it's a classic. Season 5, episode 22. Promises. The first note I had for this episode is this is just the most sitcom that ever sitcomed. And that's a fair assessment. It's prom night, and Corey and Topanga feel they're finally ready for sex. Meanwhile, Alan and Amy somehow book a room in the same hotel to celebrate Amy being pregnant, leading to hijinks to ensue, only for Corey and Topanga to realise it doesn't feel right. This episode has a few details you sort of have to overlook. Like, how do Alan and Amy not know where their son's prom is? Or why the hell are Jack and Eric as first years in college? I know Feeney hired them, it doesn't really make sense. But I don't care. This episode is absolutely gold. It's so entertaining, whether it's the guest Howie who gets dragged along, or that incredible book joke, or Eric in his mystery bag. So much of it is brilliant. And honestly, and when I could do without a whole Alan and Corey going into the wrong room and Eric thinking Alan's cheating, they're still funny bits. And there is this underlying message here, being ready for sex. And Angela raises a great point that if you can't talk about sex, you're not ready for it. It's so clever how clueless Sean really is with love. And the conclusion that Corey and Topanga come to is just so sweet. Overall, it's entertaining and the substance with it. What singled out could only dream of. 17th round, Corey's audacity makes one last appearance, but probably his worst defence yet with Season 6, Episode 8, Poetic License. In the biggest twist in Boy Meets World history, Sean Hunter writes poetry. What? We're just going to kind of overlook that. Corey, being the great friend he is, reads his poetry publicly without permission, breaking so many boundaries without even understanding the meaning of the poem. This brings out unresolved feelings between Angela and Sean. Now, you may be asking, how did Corey's worst offence crack into the top 20? Because this time Corey's called out, and Sean is rightfully furious. And in my opinion, even then he's soft on Corey. He should have dropped him here and there. However, where this episode really works is in the character study of Sean. As someone who writes songs to battle complex emotions, I relate to Sean immensely. And we really see how he wants Angela but can't bring himself to take her back. However, I take issue with Angela's slap. I get it's in the moment, but Sean had no intention to share those feelings. The man who deserved the slap was Corey, but man, the ending is so heartbreaking. Sean thinking Angela doesn't like him, lies about writing it months ago, only for the audience to know that that's not the case. It's just horrible. Overall, I love this episode for two very different reasons, but I tell you man, Corey Matthews is just the worst. 16th now. And why are all the heartbreaking episodes at the top? It's Season 7, Episode 21, Angela's Ashes. When Angela's father returns to town, offering to take Angela to Europe for a year to spend time together. But that would mean the end to Sean and Angela. Sean must do the right thing. This episode works so well as Sean slowly realises how difficult as it is. What you see in this quote, "I've lost too many people in my life. I won't lose this one." He must let her go. And Sean of all people knows the importance of time with your father, and as broken as he is, and deserving how distraught and empty it leaves him, he must let her go. In an act Corey's could just never do. It's the most selfless thing he's ever done, as he's finally met the world, and I absolutely love his inescapable change of heart. And the ending is so heartbreaking. Although I wish they delayed this until the finale, as Trina deserved to be there, it's such a sad moment for the tragedy of Sean Hunter, as we really see this guy who's got nothing left. After all the growth, after all the great things, the Matthews family is the only thing that keeps him alive. What an incredible episode. And there's 15 better than it. 15th now of an episode I cannot believe is this good. It's season 5, episode 15, First Girlfriend Club. Post the ski lodge, we take a break as Sean's past exes, led by Jennifer, come back to warn Angela about what Sean will do to her. They lock him up. On first watch, this episode was nothing special, nothing more than a fun change of pace with a great return of Jennifer, Dana and the other girl who I forget to remember. But I realise this is the most important moment in Sean. As Sean is finally ready for a permanent relationship, as he's haunted by past relationships, only to show how he's grown is so impactful and satisfying. And while it's a silly concept, the chains serve as a great metaphor with Angela coming in as a hero. It's a shame they break up only half a later, as this episode was everything. It feels anime-esque, and it's rightfully deserving of the first 10 out of 10. 14th now, with the season 3 finale, episode 22, Brother Brother. When Eric thinks he's leaving for college, Corey realises that after all these years together in the same room, he doesn't know his brother, and fears that will only get worse. Corey's audacity also makes a small appearance, don't worry, as he shames Topanga for going for a summer camp and Sean for a road trip with his father in a moment of complete selfishness. However, what makes this episode so sad is Corey's fear came to fruition. As the brothers only grow further in the upcoming seasons, I love the emphasis on growing up and cherishing childhood, and Corey breaking down is just beautiful. And when Eric doesn't get into college, in a moment that could have been foreseen a mile away, it breaks you, as Eric realises he wasted his high school time, and the decision for the brothers to go on together on a road trip is such a good overall strong moment for the brothers, and it rightfully deserves a 10 out of 10. 13th now, and probably the most real, dark and serious episode of the whole show, season 4, episode 10, Dangerous Secret. Where Corey falsely assumes Sean is having sex with a girl, leading to Corey thinking he's far behind, and pushes it too far with Topanga, when in actuality, Sean's protecting her from her abusive father. For a 90s sitcom to cover a topic like people in power taking advantage of that and being abusive, that's not only so relevant, but such a deep dive to delve into something you just wouldn't see on any other sitcom in this time period. I love how this episode depicts a relationship that Claire really cares for her father and tries to play down the abuse and offer an explanation, not understanding it's unacceptable. I love how the show shows that the kids are not mature enough for this, and while they were well intentioned and did what they deemed right, they should have gone to the police. I'm also glad it ends on a perfect happy note, and there's still an uncertainty that she's in a better place, but we don't know what will really happen to her. The B storyline is great here as it tackles the classic doing things to keep up with your friends instead of waiting until you're ready. I love the lesson Corey learns here, even if it ends abruptly to solely focus on the conclusion of the A plotline. Overall, such an important episode, and I'm so shocked a show like this covered something like this. 10 out of 10. 12th now of another Eric Corey episode. I tell you, that's some of the best as well. Season 7, episode 19, Brotherly Shove. When Corey would rather clean out his garage with his friends over his brother, which was pre-agreed, the brothers realise what little connection they have. When it comes to this episode, I'm kind of sort of looking at it as a standalone piece, as Eric out of nowhere gains sanity again, and acts more in line with the character we knew from season 3 and 4. The one we adored. But this episode illustrates the very thing Corey feared in Brother Brother, that the two are on their separate paths and are barely associated anymore. And Eric says that with the brilliance with this quote: "You shut me out of your life a long time ago." And while Eric overreacts, you get how he feels. Eric is isolated at this point. No Tommy. Feeney's moved. The parents barely believe in him and Corey's shut him out. This episode shows Eric's sad downfall. But as a whole, this episode really showing growing up and the unavoidable divide between family. And I love the message here. I also like how it takes time for Eric to accept Corey's apology. It feels earned. But overall, it's sad that the boy who in the pilot, who was so devastated when his brother took a day over him to a baseball game, now acts like his brother just doesn't exist. Overall, such a beautiful episode. 10 out of 10. 11th now, with probably the most important episode of the whole show, and I'm not exaggerating. Season 1, episode 4, Corey's alternative friends. This episode is Boy Meets World, and truly has everything. A great message and feeling lesson. Corey and Topanga beginning hilarious comedy, iconic jokes, and of course a bad continuity error with Sean's sister Stacey. I would give a synopsis, but you know this episode. Topanga is such a fascinating character and offers such a fresh worldview to Corey. I love the message of the episode of now not being afraid of what people think and inner beauty. And Topanga says one of the best lines of the whole show. Wouldn't it be interesting if your first kiss was when you thought it looked horrible? Topanga Lawrence seeing Corey using initiative to save the librarian is great. This episode has to be my most rewatched. I didn't even need to rewatch it for that ranking. It's so drilled in my brain. This episode is everything from start to finish. So well written, so defined, and guess what? There's 10 better. I couldn't think of a more deserving episode to give a 10 out of 10. Breaking into the top 10 now with the best finale. It's season 5, episode 24, Graduation. As graduation nears, Sean is feeling extremely somber, realising he could have done better. Meanwhile, Topanga must choose between Corey and Yale. So we can instantly disregard the Yale story, fortunately, as that would heavily hinder the rating, as I'm extremely fond of the retcon, and we're going to say that's the thing. This episode is just a blast to watch. I mean, in this episode, we bring out Stuart, Minkus, Frankie, and Joey, and hilarious. And all 3 cameos are just hilarious. The fact Minkus was apparently on the other side of the stool is still hysterical to me. And his rivalry with Topanga just shows what could have been, although I still believe he left at the right time. I love what they do with Sean here, as he gets that feeling that his high school time was a waste, and that realisation is great. This episode is all around just iconic. Although, do we really need Eric singing Lulu for 2 minutes? The answer is no, we didn't. However, what makes this episode stand out is the moment they give Topanga, as she gets to propose in a moment that's so progressive in the 90s. And it's such an iconic. For that alone, this episode rightfully deserves a 10 out of 10. Single digits now, and 9th for the big one. Season 7, Episode 7, It's About Time. It's wedding day, and reality has hit Sean, as this is the last time Corey and Sean will be the best friends. The fact that Corey and Topanga's wedding episode focuses on Corey and Sean is such a blatant way to show the strongest relationship in the show. I love how they build up to the breakdown, only to show the inner fears of both characters. The moment Sean gives that toast and lets Corey go is so incredible. And I love the focus of the episode. This episode also has to be Eric's greatest scheme yet, and despite the lack of believability, it's just so entertaining. However, don't let these factors stray away from the wedding itself, because when it happens, it's just incredible. And as for the vows, they get me every single time. I love Corey's especially beautiful. I never knew nothing about this world. The only thing that ever made sense to me was you. That's quote not only so powerful but incredibly thematic, and just shows how far this kid has come from Corey's alternative friends. My only complaint is I wish we got more cameos like Turner or Frankie or Minkus or bloody hell even Nebula. But overall, what an episode. 10 out of 10. 8th now, and it's a special one. Season 5, Episode 18, If You Can't Be With the One You Love. In the midst of the Lauren arc, a down bad depressed Corey resorts to alcohol, only to peer pressure Sean into doing it, only for Sean to go too far. Talking about alcohol is something other sitcoms just wouldn't touch, but this show accurately depicts the alcohol addiction, and Ryder and Ben said it extremely well. Said it excellently. I love how this episode is a catalyst for Jack to reveal that Chet was an alcoholic, as it really reinforces Sean's fear of becoming his father, and the seriousness is not downplayed. And adding well hard on Sean, his reaction is so warranted. This is a classic Corey-Sean dynamic. We see Corey's naivety falling into something bad, only for Sean to escalate it, and for Corey to need to bring him to his senses. But as for Corey, result into alcoholism is an unfortunate realistic post-breakup. I love the classic and escapism. To see that Sean hits Andrew in this episode, it's so telling that that's the moment that Sean comes to his senses, and the ending just feels so real. I just want to point out that Corey and Sean pee on a police car apparently, just thought that was worth noting. And to apologise to Feeney, Sean gives him an apple. I don't know why, but I always found that really funny. Overall, it's such a powerful and still relevant episode. 10 out of 10. 7th is actually extremely similar, as we have Season 4, Episode 11, Easy Street. When Sean gets involved with county lines after getting coerced by the mob with the intentions to buy Christmas presents, this episode is so similar to If You Can't Be One You Love, as Corey starts working for a mob only to pull out once he's aware of what he's doing. Only for Sean to do it, it's so disheartening that someone as street smart as Sean still falls into there, and someone like Sean with very little income and determination for better functionality to get blinded by the reward is so realistic. The mob duo is so well depicted and have the charm and charisma with the hint of sinister deep down, and this show does so well to show the escalation of the jobs. And I love how they do this scene at the end, where Corey convinces Sean against it, is my favourite Corey moment in the whole show. And the strength of this duo is truly on the show, and I love how they theorise that a teddy bear is in the box, knowing full well it's just... they know full well it's not a teddy bear. It's just such a beautiful episode. Meanwhile, the B storyline is quite the contrast, as Lonnie and Eric get snowed in, with the joke being Eric passed out and Lonnie had to wrap the two together naked. I don't mind it as something a bit light-hearted. This episode overall is the best Christmas episode by far, and because of Corey's one moment with Sean, it redeems all of his audacity, as this episode gets a 10 out of 10. 6th now, and it's another big one. Season 6, Episode 6, Everybody Loves Stuart. Well, this episode is aged well. For the sake of the ranking, I'm going to ignore Fred Savage and his allegation, but I do find it interesting he take a role like this, that's all I say. The highly beloved Professor Stuart pushes it when he makes a move on Topanga, leading Corey to punch him with the likelihood he'd get expelled. Do you know what's most mental for me about this one? Is that it has to be the most reasonable Corey acts in an episode. He handles it with such maturity, takes Stuart aside, sets the record straight and punches him once he's threatened. This episode is such a milestone for the 90s. And the show men in power taking advantage of vulnerable women is even more relevant today than it was then. Stuart is so effective and well depicted. The way he twists words to fit his narrative with only the bare facts, and he's so and the way he talks to Topanga is disgusting, especially with this quote. That's not what you want. The contrast between Feeney and Stuart couldn't be more evident. I love how Dean Bolden really fleshes out that connection. The Dean itself is really great this episode, and the solution she comes to is great. I also love the realism that we don't know what happened to Stuart, and he isn't put on trial or arrested. Overall, such a relevant episode, and it's even more iconic in hindsight. 10 out of 10. We finally reached the top 5, and coming in 5th is a big one. Season 4, Episode 19, A Long Walk to Pittsburgh, Part 2. Okay, you knew it'd be here. However, I'm going to be honest, this episode isn't perfect at all. The thing starts with this stereotypical British twins. They are just clear eye-rolling moments, but I just don't care. This episode of Boy Meets World and everything it stands for that moment where Topanga stands in the rain, is so iconic. And it's just everything. I love this episode, really points out the insanity in their relationship. They are not like other couple, and thus this is the episode that really started that. This episode also introduces the Amy Topanga dynamic. And when I'm glad Amy is called out, and when her concerns are valid, I don't condone her actions. And I like how Alan proper twists her whole point in this episode, and really gives us a sense of the strength of the connection the couple share. And Corey's speech is brilliant. And I love the ideas of the lost years, just desperate to remain continuity. I've got to shout out Eric, who has no reason to be here in this episode, but it's so hilarious as his voice of reason or tension killer. This episode also only gets better with the Yale retcon, and shows it was never just about Corey. Aunt Prudence had to be my favourite guest cast member as well. I love her disagreements with Feeney, and I wish she came back. And of course, we got to call out the irony that they casted somebody who played Juliet to play such a love-hater. But it has to be a 10 out of 10. 4th now, and it's a heavy one. Season 6, Episode 13. Well, have a good time then. When Chet returns to town and has a sudden heart attack, this episode is the payoff of 4 seasons of building Chet up as he finally won't run anymore, and really wants to be that father, only to die absolutely killing you. For Sean, a man who's always admired and defended his father, has finally realised his incompetence and calls him out. And that moment is so substantial and defining. And Sean's right. Chet fully intended to go to Vegas after his recovery. However, Sean changes his mind in a heartbreaking moment. This quote from Sean is his absolute plead, as all his faults, as why Chet continuously left him pounce out. It's like I'm watching myself do things I hate. Why couldn't you have stuck around? Wasn't I good enough for you? Only for Chet to rebut with the opposite, that he was never good enough only for him to realise how much they needed each other. But it's too late. He's gone. The writing is so well done. So tear-jerky. I also love what they do with Sean and Jack, really connecting with one, even if of course it's money-centric. But overall the episode was so rewarding and impactful. 10 out of 10. The top 3. Now in third is one that really surprised me. This episode really got to me. It's season 3, episode 11, City Slickers. When Sean and Corey go to Feeney's mountains, only for them to see a new side of their teacher. When this episode started, it felt very standard, nothing of note. However, out of nowhere, it became something. As the boys lose Feeney's watch, that moment from William Daniels, you see so much pain in him, but he can't lose it, and passively puts it aside. What an incredible moment. This episode builds a relationship not really focused on in the show. Feeney and Sean. Feeney was always more involved than Eric and Corey, while Turner was always more of Sean's teacher. But this episode really shows how he cared for Sean, and it's beautiful. This episode serves as a character study for Feeney, as Sean reads Feeney's diary and really humanises Feeney, as we see he's not too different from Sean, calling in sick when he's sneaking up to the mountains with a girl. And the fact Feeney wasn't furious at him, but happy he read a book. What a sensational moment. This episode really paints the tragedy of Feeney, and his diary is such an effective device to prevent this. But don't you worry, this episode isn't short of laughs or hijinks everywhere. It's truly a remarkable achievement in television, and rightfully deserves a 10 out of 10. Just 2 to go now, and the second best episode of the show is season 4, episode 21, Cult Fiction. Not sure what he believes in and where his life's going, Sean joins a cult, not realising what he's getting himself into. For a 90s sitcom to be so blunt about the realities of cults is something you just wouldn't normally see. This show depicts it so well. Mr. Matt works so well as an accurate cult leader, someone welcoming but with a sinister undertone. This episode fleshes out Sean more than any other episode. If we play on the psychology and beliefs, it's totally understandable why someone like Sean would get sucked into that. And they don't shy away from the mental issues that occur. Some might see Turner's sudden big role jarring, however I see it as a last-ditch attempt to save Sean. Sean and Turner is great in this episode. I love when he asks, why do you need this cult? He isn't judgmental, but he wants to understand him, in contrast to Feeney, who sees his stance irrefutable. But this episode brings out one of Boy Meets World's most powerful moments, as Sean, in a moment of desperation, prays to God. The fact the show only really mentions God makes it all the more powerful, and Ryder acting is sensational. The episode is so powerful and powerful and relevant even today, and really demonstrates the best of Boy Meets World. 10 out of 10. But still, there's one better. And the best episode of Boy Meets World, come on, you already know, season 5, episode 17, and then there was Sean. This episode is a miracle on every level. It's such a fitting number 1. As after the bottom 3 was consumed... It's such a thematic number 1. As after the bottom 3 was consumed with dream sequences, who would have thought number 1 would be a dream sequence? But the glaring difference is this episode adds so much to the inner workings of Sean's mind, and how he needs Corey and Topanga together just as much as they do. And that's so fascinating. But overall, the episode is such a blast from start to finish. The best part is you don't have to know Scream to get it. Just as much as someone who's a Scream superfan. The episode is also just hilarious. Whether it's the cast laughing knowing Kenny's the first boot, Jack wanting to kill himself after Eric's death, Andrew screaming, or my personal favourite, the virgin joke. Where Sean goes, only virgins survive in a horror movie. Corey looks at Topanga, is like, Thank you for saving me. Eric goes, I'm dead. Jack goes, I'm dead. And Sean, in the best line of the whole show, says, I'll get as sick as you can get without actually dying. Or, this episode also contains an underrated joke from Feeney where he goes, when one mocks someone, they should wait until they're not looking at them. For start to finish, an absolute blast and something you just need to watch it to understand. I couldn't think of a more deserving episode of a 10 out of 10 and the number one spot. Well, it was good to end on a bit of a happier note. I feel like I was going to be in tears for all that, but yeah. And that was the Boy Meets World ranking. What journey! What struggle! Looking at you, Corey. But I'm so glad I did it. Boy Meets World, well, not perfect. He's a standout in its generation and should be remembered fondly. No one's made it to the end. If you have, I might as well give. I don't know, fuck Savannah. This is like 4 hours. Subscribe. But honestly, I had such joy making this, and you know, this is my passion project. This is my favourite TV show of all time, and this was never something that I made for views or for success. I did this, you know, for myself. I don't care. My friends have never seen Boy Meets World, and never will. It's probably not for them. You know, no one in my life has ever seen it. I've tried to get people into it, but they haven't. But this was a personal thing for me. I don't care if it gets 1 views or 10 billion views. I'll always hire it as my magnum opus, and yeah. But thank you lot for watching. Goodbye.